communication with any of those gents for about a month or so. I think Jim's on some kind of road trip traveling around the country. He got his induction this last week, I think.
Induction into
The Michigan Hall of Fame, I think it is.
wow. Okay, that's pretty cool.
The Aviation Hall of Fame. Remember I think we were talking about that
We
last
might
time
have
we were
been.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a minute, and I've slept since then.
So how you been, my friend?
Been pretty good. Been pretty good. Big day yesterday. I Friend of mine and I we rolled down to Hazel Green, Missouri, which is just past Waynesville and Fort Leonard Wood and all that on Route 66. The the Missouri Route 66 Association took ownership of a Route 66 bridge that went in the 1920s that MoDOT had closed down just because of it was deteriorating and so safety and all that. And so now we are slowly trying to raise funds and all that to basically, I say restore the bridge, not restore it to handling, auto traffic, but to restore it to where it's safe for foot traffic and whatnot, and then clean up around the area, kind of expand around the area into a like a roadside park. So when people are traveling Route 66, they can stop, they can see the bridge, they can take pictures and do all that stuff, walk across it, and stretch their legs from the road and all that. So we spent God, we all got down there right around 8:30, and I think we ended up leaving there, around 2:30, 2:45. We had a we had a small Kubota excavator out there, and 5 or 6 chainsaws and limb
You mean
cutters, and
you mean you get out the man toys and man, there's nothing like cranking up something like that, firing that thing up and going and just changing whatever the hell was to something that is something new. That's just awesome.
oh, it absolutely is. And I mean, like the amount of work that we got done, though, just the big thing we were doing was clearing a lot of the deadfall and brush, small trees. So anything 3 inches and under, we were allowed to take down, because you have the riverbed where the river normally flows, but then when you get all the weather and everything, it overflows that, and you kind of have a floodplain around it. And so the idea was clear a lot of that out, um, so it doesn't create obstructions and stuff like that for water flowing through, and then also make it easier once we start tearing into everything to actually build the park. And so, on a semi-regular basis, we go down there and we just start clearing things out and just doing upkeep with it.
How many
And
acres? How big is it?
um, that's a good question. It's funny that you asked that because I was sitting there and I was walking along, heading towards the bridge from where we had parked, because they built another bridge next to that, and then that bridge parallels the interstate. And so that small bridge that they built next to the old Gasconade Bridge is, that's the emergency and snow route kind of thing for the interstate and whatnot. But so we're parked under these 3 bridges because they kind of have a little landing down there and stuff like that, and like a little spot where you could, actually drive down and like launch a small boat for fishing or whatever. And I'm walking along towards the old bridge, and I'm like, how much space is this? Like I'm sitting there and it's like, is this like a half acre? Is this like a full acre down here? Like, what are we doing? Like, how much area have we actually cleared? So it was pretty cool. And so there's maybe about a dozen of us down there total, just working away.
Yeah,
And
when you've got the right equipment like that Kubota you were mentioning, I mean, it actually becomes kind of fun
yeah,
because you can do a lot in a very short amount of time, when you have the
right.
right tools. when I was
Yeah,
up
well,
on.
and that was kind of the great thing too, was so when I was sitting there talking with Rich, the guy, he's the president of the association, and he's the guy with Kubota. We kind of got everybody there, and I'm talking with Rich. I'm like, well, we've got like 5, 6 chainsaws, and we've got this, that, and the other thing. Why don't we get a team of people on chainsaws, get them moving ahead of everybody? We can have
Oh, wait,
people
wait,
who don't
wait,
know.
wait, wait, wait. You didn't start with scalpels?
No, tiny, tiny little survival handsaws is what we started
Yeah,
with.
yeah,
Little
yeah.
tiny
You're
ones
you
with the finger loops on the end.
yeah, your
Um,
little Swiss Army knife with the 27
right.
different things in
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
exactly. No, so I was like, let's do, almost like a police line. We'll have the chainsaws working ahead of us. Everybody else who doesn't have power tool can take snips or whatever, cut vines, cut small stuff, and then also have people pulling back all the brush and all the small trees and everything. And we can get it piled up. And then, you can come in with the excavator, push down the bigger stuff that we can't get through quickly, and then also collect everything, with the bucket and the thumb. And so we just did that. And so kind of sort of working in a loose, team, of things, kind of just pushed down under the bridge and a little bit past it. So it was a
When I
lot of
was up
fun.
on the when I was up on the homestead in Canada, I was on a quarter section, which is
Mhm.
160 acres, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Quarter mile square.
Right.
We had a 1 acre size garden,
Oh,
just
wow.
just the garden, right? And we were growing everything you could imagine. And
Yeah.
some things that I did not know, and I was what, 22 at this point,
Hmm.
back in 79, and I had heard about rhubarb. I maybe had it in a pie somewhere, but apparently rhubarb, this is about 90 miles north of Calgary out in what they call the parkland.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's rural. There's nothing out there but farms and just awesomeness. But
Right.
apparently these people are big into their rhubarb. When I first got there, Jonathan, the guy that had homesteaded the place back in 1928,
Oh,
the guy
wow.
the guy that my wife and I at the time, we wrote a letter, had it published in Natural Life magazine,
Okay.
and that was the equivalent of Mother Earth news in the States, right?
Okay.
So we published this letter that, we were a couple of young pups and we had a teepee and we were ready to work the land and all that shit. So Jonathan Waterhouse was this guy's name. He was a merchant seaman from England.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he came over after, I think he said he spent, like, I sat down and I interviewed him. I've got the tapes somewhere, which is
Yeah.
just absolutely amazing. But he said that he, had decided he didn't want anything to do with England. He didn't have any family. And at the time, Canada, their immigration rules were that if you worked, uh, you had to clear 80 acres and work 10 of them over a 6 year period, then you would be granted the land.
Oh, wow. That's
So,
it's kind of like all the land rush stuff in Oklahoma back in the,
exactly, right?
18, yeah, in the 1800s. That's pretty cool.
So so when I got there, he had an acre-sized garden with, again, everything else, but there was these ginormous rhubarbs, and I'm looking at this shit going, "Wow, look how big these things are." And I'd whack a bunch of that stuff, and on Tuesdays in Olds, Alberta, which was about, I think it was like 30 or 40 miles east of Sunbury,
Mm.
where I was. Every Tuesday they had the auction, and it was just like you would see out of a Clint Eastwood movie, right?
Yeah.
Cattle, animals, vegetables, hay. We fact out of the 80 acres that were cleared,
Yeah.
we were growing Kentucky bluegrass and alfalfa,
Oh,
and
nice.
we would get about 3,200 bales of hay every season out of that
Oh,
80 acres.
wow. Yeah.
And the Hutterites were the ones that had all the tools, right? So they'd show up, big group of them. They'd have the baler and, all the equipment, and they'd come in with their group. They'd knock it out, stack it up, and they were gone. And I think we gave them I think we got about 4,000 bales a season, and they got 800 for doing it all.
Wow.
But I'd load that all that. I'd get about 50 bales,
Yeah.
and we had, and we had around 50 leghorn chickens. So I'd get 5 or 6 or more dozen eggs a week.
Yeah.
So I'd load up a bunch of eggs, some hay, and a shitload of rhubarb, and I'd go into the auction on Tuesdays and sell the shit at the auction.
Yeah.
Eh,
Rhubarb's crazy, man. Like you can hear that stuff grow.
Dude, this stuff, it was so big. I mean, the leaves were ginormous, but the stalks were about that big. I mean, they were huge. They just
Holy
kept
crap.
growing out. And
Wow.
so I mean, when I say whack, I had to whack them.
Yeah.
I'd take a machete and
Oh
carve
yeah.
up the stalks and then load them up. I mean, it was these things were huge, and I had it a couple of times, I think, while I was up there because everybody was just going on about the rhubarb. That rhubarb I got more money for the rhubarb than I did for the eggs.
Yeah, like they up north, man. They like their rhubarb. There were like strawberry rhubarb pie and things like that was real big back in North Dakota. And the Hutterites, you bring up the Hutterites. So it was about hour and a half kind of west and north of us. Back in the 70s, they had put in I think it was the Stanley Mickelson. Uh, oh, good Lord. It was all part of our missile defense system that we were developing back then. Because
Hmm.
ICBMs were starting to get, real big and everybody's getting worried about them and all that. And so you had like your Sprint missile sites and things like that. And you had this thing called SAGE, which is the semi-automatic ground environment, which would series of computers.
Dude, I burn sage all the time. I, I'm sure it's a different brand. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Right, yeah. But like all this stuff connected into Sage and it all connected into the facility at Nakoma. And it was a huge radar system. Massive. It was so big they built it into this giant pyramid. And they'd have the sensor panels on the side of it. And the thing was only 100% operational for 3 days. And then they were like, good God, this costs so much to operate.
Hmm.
We're scaling this back a bit. And so like, they'd bring it online, but they wouldn't have everything fully powered up. They just do what they need to do to run system checks and, all that stuff. And work some of the systems that would actively detect things and whatnot. And then all of that, fed into the Sage, and it also fed back to NORAD and all those things. And then they shut it down. Technology advanced, and it kind of became useless. And because it was so big and it sucked up so much power and was so expensive to operate, they just ended up shutting it down completely. And they ended up selling off the land that it was all on, plus all the service support center buildings and stuff that were associated with it. And the complex itself was huge. You had this massive pyramid above ground, and it's still there. But you had a massive underground complex beneath that with all the systems to operate everything and stuff like that. And they partially flooded it, to demilitarize it and all that stuff. And they ended up selling off the land. And then a little while later, all that land and everything got sold off to the Hutterites because it was out in the middle of just massive farm fields. Like it was just nothing but prairie. And so yeah.
Well, the Hunterites are very, they're along the lines of, the Amish, and there's another group, name escapes me at the moment, but they do that community thing, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So when they get the community, the families and everybody organized and oriented, and
Right.
they put them to work,
Yeah.
and they get out and they get the shit done.
They do. I mean, watching the Amish raise a barn,
Oh,
holy shit. Oh my God. Like it's
yeah. I mean,
crazy.
not only raise them, have you seen the videos of them picking them up and moving them?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's
I
like
was just gonna mention
400
that.
of them, and they're all under the barn, and they're
They
just.
just
I mean,
they just lift it and they
yeah. I
we got
mean,
to move it over 15 feet. All right.
and so, and that a lot like the military, you
Hmm.
don't have to worry about the the chance of somebody's shoelaces not being tied and therefore tripping and knocking over an entire side. These
Right.
people these people are very disciplined at what they do.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
and the thing about discipline, to maybe transverse into a whole nother subject here, can you tell me what your thoughts are on what you're seeing going on in general across the system landscape, meaning all the different systems that we use to do
Yeah.
things? Do you see any kind of commonalities, patterns, anything in that space, especially coming from your
I
military
tell you what,
background?
I am so I am so dialed in locally.
Hmm.
Um, it gets kind of hard to observe what's going on around me. It was funny because I was working for a reconnaissance wing at my last historian position, and I was like, okay, there's a lot to do here, and then they're like, oh yeah, we're I get the job out here, and it's like, yeah, we're a organization of 500 people, right? 550 people. And, Grand Forks was like 2,300. So I'm thinking like, okay, smaller outfit, less going on probably. It'll be a little easier to stay on top of things and kind of be more efficient with stuff. Holy crap. Was I wrong? Because everything we do, so I work for the Cyberspace Capability Center, and it's all IT stuff. Like and providing IT, as an enterprise,
Hmm.
right?
All right.
And so you're looking at all the zero trust things that are going on, all the crypto modernization stuff, that's going on. It's dealing with all of that stuff, and like all of the moving parts and pieces in a field that like I am rudimentarily familiar with. It's like it's a little overwhelming, and I was like really surprised once I got in and started seeing like all the moving parts and pieces within the organization. I was like,
Hmm. Yeah.
and
Well,
so like,
the reason I'm bringing this up is,
yeah.
clearly the oxygen is being sucked out of the air by everything around Doge, right?
Mhm. Oh
And
yeah,
eh,
that's been an interesting one. I mean, hey, we've um every Monday we've got to send in our our weekly activity report and things like that, until further notice.
until further
And
notice. And so this is something that I'm finding, and I'm glad that you have had that experience and you're actually on it as well, because that means you are in where it's actually having an impact.
yeah.
The thing that I'm enjoying watching is it seems as though any kind of process or system that executes an interaction and or transaction is
Hmm.
all of a sudden getting its skirt lifted.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Well, there's a lot of people freaking out about it too.
as
And
they should,
well,
I think.
yeah. I mean, with some things, yes. Some things probably not as much. Um, like when Doge hit Social Security and then started coming out with all first there's like all the 150-year-old 200-year-old people thing, like that's a problem. But then you look at some things where it's like you have children who are getting Social Security checks, and it's like, well, now hold on, wait a minute. If a parent dies, the children are entitled to that. They
Well,
get that.
but
And so
the
it's,
ones that I've heard that
yeah.
they've come up with is that these are newly minted kids.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's
And
there's
you
been a
go,
bunch of
well,
that. And you're
how do
like,
you
yeah,
how's that
it,
happen?
right.
What's going
It's
on there?
or they haven't even been, newly minted yet.
Yeah, yeah.
That stuff's crazy. So it's like there's a lot of trying to sift through everything,
Hmm.
and get an accurate picture of
Well, let
stuff.
me ask you this: when
Interesting.
just throw a dart on the wall, free ball it, swing it. Um, what percentage of these systems do you think are functioning properly versus has a whole bunch of more corruption and more crap in it than good stuff? What percentage? Do you think it's like a 50-50? 50% is it's
I'm
all
not
fine
even
and good and 50% it's highly questionable? Or is it where is it?
I'm not even sure I can put a percentage on that one, to be completely honest. Nor do I think I would be necessarily comfortable in doing that, just because I don't have a good enough lockdown on a lot of that stuff. Like I
Well,
said,
what's your gut say? To throw a dart.
I mean, I'd say
What do you
I
suspect?
I suspect, you know, not necessarily throwing out a percentage or something like that, but I suspect that there are probably a lot of systems that are very antiquated, that are, no longer the peak of efficiency. Now I'm not saying that everybody's in there working on a, Apple IIe or something, or a
No, they're
Zenith.
working some in some cases they're not only working with COBOL, but they're still using punch cards and 14 7/8 by 11 green bar continuous form print paper on a key punch machine.
Right.
I mean, these guys, I
I hadn't
mean,
heard
this
about
is
that
some of
one.
this.
That's crazy.
Well, you know about the mine where they store
Yeah.
all of these Social Security. What?
Yeah. All the retirement paperwork stuff and
What?
everything.
What
Yeah.
is going on there?
Well, like, and see, so here's like the double-edged sword of things, right? So if you look at how we store and, record data electronically,
Hmm.
right? Magnetic discs, magnetic tapes, all that stuff degrades
Yeah,
over time.
yeah,
CDs will degrade over time. Like, just as a quick example, I mean, there's a whole crap load of DVDs right now out there that are basically no longer playable because the laminating process where they put, the
yeah. The
writable
coding, the
material,
coding. Yeah, yeah. Right.
yeah, is like delaminating from the rest of the disc, just because whatever adhesives they use eventually gives way,
I
right?
have a shitload of those in storage out in the back. I
Right.
know.
Yeah. So in a certain on a certain level, and this is probably the historian in me, right? It's good
The hard
that
copy.
we have the hard copy. That way, if something hits the fan, we
Hmm.
can, yeah, send Smith down into the mine, level 52, aisle Bravo
Order 6,
37.
aisle
Right, right.
room 12,
And go
shelf
pull this
X.
box. So at least does it take a super long time? Absolutely. But it's still there if something
Well,
happens.
yeah, so
But
but
like
you could say that about all of the data that we have in
right.
government and every business that, insurance, it doesn't matter, any administrative, my point is this. The
Yeah.
systems themselves, aside from
Mhm.
the antiquation of the storage, which is in
Mhm.
some cases mind-boggling,
Right.
and I agree with you in the hard copy. I'm a hard copy
Yeah.
kind of guy. I'm a have a multiple backup kind of guy. I get it. I've
I
lost
can't
stuff.
tell you I can't
Yeah,
tell you how many copies of my DD214 I have like stacked out in prints, like, a half-inch tall,
yeah,
scattered in various boxes, drawers, files, like just in
right.
case.
But my point, I exactly, I'm right there with
And
you. But
yet
my
I
point
can't
about
laminate my
this,
social security card.
my point about this is that when I asked you about the discipline,
Yeah.
about what we're seeing and
Mhm.
how discipline, the accountability of things,
Yeah.
has not no there has not been a focus on it like this ever.
Right. Yeah.
And
Not
what it's
and not at this level. Like if you talk about like internally,
right.
organizationally, sure.
Yeah, but
But
you don't see any results from it. That's the thing. What we
yeah,
see
or
right
the public
now,
doesn't readily notice it or things. But yeah, this
well,
is
those
of a different
those who
scale
track
altogether.
the data, those who watch the numbers and do the analysis,
Yeah.
there's been a growing cacophony of
Mhm.
voices for the
Yeah.
last 2+ decades. I know because I've been one of them, and I go back 3 decades calling this shit out, going, "Hey,
Yeah.
there's something stinky here. There's something that doesn't look right." And there's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of people that have been aware of it because they've observed it and they've analyzed
Mhm.
it, and they've determined that their needs are if your analysis only results in more questions than you started with, then you
Yeah.
probably have a situation. You've got a problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah,
And
and that's a reasonable conclusion to come to, I would say. I,
right,
I I think what's really great though is you do see some of the things now where like, this is where this is gonna have an impact on efficiency. There was something, the most recent thing that pops into my head because it was mentioned earlier on something I was watching while I was changing out the starter on my Beetle. Um, the the IRS, right?
yes,
Their web page, the login button
in the
wasn't where
middle of
it
the
normally
page,
is.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they're like, oh yeah, it's going to take about 120 days. It's going to be before June before we can actually get that done. And it's like, are you kidding me? And they go in and they move it up to where most login stuff is, so it's all uniform and easy to find in 70 hours.
70
It's like,
seconds or
or
70
70
minutes, 70
70 minutes.
minutes,
Yeah, 70 minutes.
70
Sorry.
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even 70 hours would be better than June, right?
Well,
Like, yeah,
exactly right, exactly. But
right.
that's
So,
just we're seeing
yeah.
these kinds of examples
Hmm.
of systems
Yeah.
that are broken for a variety of reasons. A lot of it
Right.
is just it wasn't. First of all, it was never designed with this in mind, where we are now. Second, it has morphed over time and been held together by baling wire, bubble gum, and duct tape over
Yeah.
decades. And there's been enough people with nefarious intent and intellect and access that have
Hmm.
gone in and purposely manipulated the system, knowing that the obfuscation, the subterfuge, and the deflection was built into what was in the system already that they were
Right.
taking advantage of. So now it's like, okay, all of that stuff is being, you know, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden the lights are on and people are going, whoa, look at this room. What have you guys been doing in here?
Yeah.
Who
It's
owns the lock to this door?
right.
Uh,
And like that's the thing is it's like you look at a lot of the stuff, right? And so just having been involved in it in terms of like being on the receiving end of some of it, right? You have this interesting kind of dichotomy, this strange duality, like the 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 peace symbol on the flak jacket and Born to Kill written on the helmet, with Matthew Modine and Full Metal Jacket. Oh, it's a statement on the duality of man, sir. Like it's one of those moments where like you're like, yes, get in there, find these things so we can get these things corrected and we can get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing. But then like you look at how some of it is executed and you're like, okay, we probably could have done a better job in dealing with some of these people than we've done. Like, and like, I was really on the receiving end of it. Not just in like the, oh well, we're cutting the government or we're like doing things like that, but like, so the position that I am in, um, it was advertised on USA Jobs and everything like that, listed as permanent position. When I applied for it, it was permanent position, but there was something within the USA Jobs, that's where the government posts all of its job listings, right? There's a thing in there where if you click the little radio buttons, um, for the various benefits that you receive, like if you're a disabled veteran or things like that, right? Which kind of helps rack and stack your application,
mhm.
because they look for veterans, disabled veterans, things like that, and that kind of gives it a higher ranking in the pile. Um, But when you click those, if you're already a federal employee and you apply for it, then this is the best that we can kind of figure happened, right? Is that when you going through the regular application process and you click these radio buttons, even when you're already a federal employee, the system will rack and stack everything and it'll automatically apply certain hiring authorities to that. And so what ended up happening was, instead of bringing me on as a reassignment, it brought me in as a term hire and a term not to exceed 18 May 2025. Because basically you have, like, for federal civil service, you have a probationary period, right?
Yeah,
You
but
go in there.
back up. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
So this rack and stack that you mentioned, by
Uh-huh.
ticking off these boxes that then connected you to whatever other hierarchy it was connected to,
Yeah.
it sounds like that wasn't correct. Like it should have been
Right.
something else, right?
Right. Because there's no option in that stack there that says I'm currently a federal employee. It's just a
You're
different
already
hiring
an employee,
authority.
you're just moving into this position.
Right.
Right.
And, so not seeing anything like that, and, hey, I want to make sure that I'm set up to be able to get, this job, set myself up as best as I can, working within the framework of everything to, get a better chance of getting selected. I click my veterans preference stuff and things like that, just like when I applied for when I got the job out of Grand Forks, and it automatically went through that hiring process, and all, going through that hiring authority and everything. And so when they bring you on under those authorities, basically it looks like it almost sets you back to being a new employee. And
Yeah.
you go to
So
something.
you're on a probationary term until May 18th, or did you get that fixed?
We got it taken care of, thankfully.
Yeah.
We got it taken care of. So it's not the
So
same as being
do you have a new term? Are you one of those government lifers now where you will be 160 and still be getting paid and get benefits?
Okay, first of all, I'm going to make sure that when, if I retire from federal service, they know that I'm retired and they're not continuing to pay me except for my pension. You know,
I bet that's hard for a lot of people to pass up, though.
I could certainly understand it. I would never do it. That's just not in my character to do,
Yeah.
But like, yeah, so it got squared away, and because it brought me in as a term because they brought me in under that hiring authority, it basically converted it to a term position, which it's a permanent, and for term positions, you're a term employee in a permanent position, which after a year of, showing, hey, I could do my job, your organization will convert you to permanent. And
so you still have a bit of a probationary period. You got a year.
No, I no longer, I don't have a probationary period. I completed my probationary period, several years ago. But I think it was, for me, it was a 2-year probationary period.
But wait a minute, I thought you just took this new position. What you're
I
doing
did.
now.
Right. Yeah, I took it back last May. Yeah. But so what it is like, with term is different than probationary.
Right.
Everybody who's a new federal employee and they're brand new to the system is a probationary employee for X number of years. For me, it was 2. And then once you complete that 2 years or whatever years it is for that position, you become a permanent employee and are considered permanent employee. The term thing is really just a person who's, gets put into a permanent position, but they just have you on this term status, and then it has to be initiated by your organization, but it converts to permanent. And so we had dropped our HR folks, they saw it coming up. They dropped the paperwork for request for personnel action in November. The PD, so like position description, like kind of gives you, duty descriptions and all that stuff, the scope of what you're going to be doing, needed to be reviewed because it was an older PD and it hadn't been reviewed in a while. And so career field manager up at AFPC kicks it back saying, hey, just need you to do a quick review of this PD, make sure this is all the same, everything like that, and then just resubmit. So we go through all that, resubmit. We got everything submitted before the hiring freeze.
Nice.
So, right. Yeah. It's like, all right, cool. We going to be good.
Now,
right.
all right. So,
And then
so
the hiring freeze happens. And so AFPC halted all processing of any requests for personnel action unless there were specific exceptions that came in. Everything halted. And it's like, because they were like, no new hires. We're not doing any hiring or fill actions. And it's like, why have you halted this? I'm considered a permanent federal employee because I've gone past my probationary period. 2, I'm in a permanent position. This is not a term position. And so they had to figure all this stuff out. And, we finally got it sorted out. And, the SF50 showing the conversion from term to permanent showed up. So I was like, yay, I'm still going to have a job on May 18th, but I'm,
so
that's one of those things, though, is like when you talk about, problems in the systems, inefficiencies, poor design.
That leads me to the obvious question. Having gone through that and
Yeah.
being a systems and numbers and process kind of guy,
Mm-hmm.
if you could wave your wand
Mm-hmm.
over that process, what would how much improvement do you think you could add just by looking at it, saying, do this, don't do that, get rid of this?
There could be a lot. There could be a lot. And that's the thing is like,
At
I think it's
at a minimum, cut the time down, right?
right. And there's a lot of things where, and I think that's one of the biggest things is like, okay, yeah, there's going to be spots where you have those corruption kind of things, right? Because people are human and they're going to human. You know what I mean? Like, but
people are going to human.
Right. Yeah. Humans are going to human. But so set that off to the side in its own pile, right?
Yeah.
My experience, and I know my experience isn't everyone else's experience, but my experience has been that basically everybody that I've worked with that's been a civilian federal employee working for the DoD have all been solid people. They show up to work on time. They do their job. They care about doing their job. They care about making sure that mission happens, that, our service members are supported in the field and in garrison how they need to be. Like they're not like, schlubs hanging out in the break room, chugging sodas and playing D&D and just not doing anything, right? Like
Cheetos on the couch. That's right.
Right. Yeah, they are working and they're working hard to make sure that mission happens, because the way we view our civilians within DoD, right? And I can only speak from working for Department of the Air Force as a civilian perspective, because I haven't worked for Department of the Army or Navy or anything like that. So I just have the one branch to look at from. But I can tell you this much from the Air Force foxhole: the Air Force considers its civilian workforce as airmen. You are a part of the team. You may not be wearing the camouflage suit, but the things that you do are just as critical as the things that they're doing, because what we do allows those guys and gals to be able to execute the missions that they have to.
Well, and to that point, Jason,
Yeah.
do you know which branch of the armed services is the most patriotic?
I'm terribly biased because I'm an old Army guy. So I'm going to say Army.
Well, no. It's the Air Force. They are USAF.
Jesus God. Dad joke. Dad joke. That was a good one.
Yeah, I thought you'd appreciate that.
Yeah, no. So it's like there's a lot of things where it's like if we could go in and improve the systems, like one of the biggest things I always saw, when I was in the Army was like, why is it that I have to log in to 55 different websites to go do various training or go update something? Like, and they've had these things where they've tried to, and this is like a DoD wide thing, right? Where they've tried to consolidate. right? And give you a hub where you can access everything from that hub. But like whenever I went to that hub, and things have changed, from when I was using those specific things all the time to today. It's gotten better in certain regards, but it would be like I would log into that place, and then I could do a couple of things under a couple of different programs, or access points. But then there's a whole slew of other things that when I went to click on it, it'd take me to a whole other page and I'd have to
God
log
knows where
in
you
there.
go. That's right. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, why am I having to log in for a third time to go take a cyber awareness training? This is ridiculous,
Well,
right?
see, and all these things that we've been talking about, and I've yammered on about for a few years now.
Yeah.
The systems they can't be fixed or repaired. They have to be replaced. They are
Yeah.
these decades old
Hmm.
clogged up systems of
Yeah.
corruption and crap and nonsense and no common sense, because none of it has been designed with any efficiency strategy and design in mind. There's
Well,
the
and that's
efficiency of getting things done, and this is, I think, one of the biggest reveals that's happening right now.
yeah.
The Doge systems, all they're
Hmm.
doing is going in and looking at how a system works, right? It
Right.
interrogates the pathways, the endpoints, the interactions,
Hmm.
and all of that, and none of that has ever been done before. There hasn't
Right.
been a tool capable of doing it on this scale and with
Yeah.
this amount of efficiency.
Hmm.
The broader point of what I think is happening here is that right now people are all absorbed by the tool and the findings. Sure, I couldn't believe. Oh no,
Yeah.
it's mind-boggling what's going on.
Oh yeah.
What everybody seems to be missing is the fact that what's happening is an efficiency and productivity process audit.
Yeah.
The
And
auditing of the actual data within the systems is the next step. But until
right.
you know that the system that handles the data
Yeah.
was handling it correctly, and you knew where the input and outputs were and all those good things, whatever
Right.
affected the data as it was being handled. Well, all
Yeah.
of that shit is being shown as, oh my God, you guys, how do you do this again? And
Right.
why do you have 15 steps to go from A to B? That part of it, the realization of having to have a purposeful, intentional look and at your design, your system, your process, the flow, the data
Yeah.
points, the interactions, all of the things that us geeks have been having to pay attention to for decades, because that's how computers work,
Right.
right? So all of a sudden, the logic of the binary models and the
Yeah.
way that we compute, that's what a computer is. It does computation. That's why they
Well,
call it a
and here's
computer.
something else is like honestly, right now, and this is just me speaking, right? I ain't speaking on behalf of anybody, all of my comments are as a private citizen kind of thing, right?
That's
Like,
okay, and you're safe. We're on a secure VPN, so
okay.
we're live to the rest of the world, but our conversation is secure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's this is one of those things that like right now, if we're wanting to achieve the things that we're wanting to achieve or wanting to maintain the things that we're wanting to maintain, it's critical that we're going through something like this and taking care of these and finding the inefficiencies. Like anybody who's paying attention to anything understands, the big race for AI, right? The
Hmm.
big race
Yeah.
for AI and the big race, not only that, but for quantum computing,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because the first person who achieves a really solid AI and that can incorporate quantum computing and things like that, all of the legacy encryption stuff is done. It's done for, and you have to
Well,
create whole new things that can deal with quantum level computing.
right.
And it's
But
like if
but
we're going toe
quantum
to toe,
quantum computing and the way it's been described and being approached right now will never happen. So I'll just throw that in. They're
well,
they're
yeah,
they're doing the same thing that these idiots over at CERN are doing. They keep smashing things into each other, looking for the smaller and smaller and smaller. And the universe is just going to continue to provide smaller and smaller shit for them to chase because they're looking in the wrong place for the wrong thing for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
Quantum, if you know anything about quantum computers, these
Mhm.
things, they're only accurate maybe 70% of the time. They have to be isolated and completely from any consciousness. Therefore, whenever they trigger it, nobody knows when the trigger time is.
Yeah.
I mean, these things don't work. But my point is, more importantly, the AI that you mentioned,
Yeah.
all it is a information interrogation system.
Right.
That's
But
all it
you know,
does.
the more the more rapidly and efficiently that those things can move in doing what they do,
Mhm.
right? That, the theory, the going theory is, I guess you could say, is that, all of our security stuff, what we use for our, our logins and for bank stuff and encryption of data and all that, like once you can get to that point where you can get those things running, it's going to be easy to get into everything. And so
Well,
you have to
but here,
develop
but
more
here's
and better security measures.
well, and this is the part that I don't think people realize.
Hmm.
There won't be just one AI, number one. There's
Well,
not going to
right.
be somebody's not going to come up with just the
Yeah.
absolute model that everybody adopts. That's not going to
Right.
happen. The
Yeah.
open source systems are what's going to be available.
Right.
The people will be able to take these things and create their own personal assistants.
Yeah.
So essentially, it'll be kind of like your digital
Mhm.
kind of clone, but it's your assistant because you've defined its parameters. You've defined your likes, the
Right.
dislikes, the
And
security,
that's going to be a huge portion of it. But when you're
and
looking
and
at
the
it from like a defense thing, though, like my thing
and
is this with
well, hold on,
cracking.
hold on, hold on. Let me say
Yeah. Go
this,
ahead.
and then see if this makes sense.
Okay.
To that point, because everybody will have their own personal assistant, which is their own AI assisted
Yeah.
agent, right? With a bunch of agents, the people that are going to try to do nefarious shit are going to be, and they're already doing battle
Yeah.
with the people who are going to defend against that.
Right.
The
No, they
battle right
absolutely are.
now, we are in AI wars, what I'm
Yeah.
calling the battle of the bots. Okay,
Mhm.
none of them are going to necessarily win. It's going to be the free open source that people can configure to their own likes and needs that's
Yeah.
going to win. So if somebody's trying to launch nefarious AI and go attack DDoS system, whatever the style is, there
Yeah.
are going to be a whole bunch of AI agents designed to thwart that attack. There's more
Right.
of those than there
Yeah.
are of those that are trying to attack. So
Yeah.
I
No.
I
And
think the
and and
security is going to be really good.
I think it will be, but like in terms of just efficiencies of systems and everything operating, like we have to figure these things out. And the more efficient that we can make the systems, the better off we're going to be in
Hmm.
combating those things. Like it's everybody's looking at the immediate thing that's coming up on, on Fox, CNN, MSNBC, like all those things, all of the stuff that's getting thrown out, on X and on Facebook and wherever else, right? Like everybody's focused on that and they're focused out on the range when we were like going through, qualification courses and stuff with our rifles and whatnot. If you were lucky enough, you go to a range with pop-up targets. And we had, you had one at 50 and you had one at 100, 150, 200, and you'd have another one out at 300 yards, right? Well, that one that was at 50, right? We call that Fast Freddy. All right. Because you get so focused on trying to knock down that damn 300 that's out there that you forget that Fast Freddy's popping up, right? And it's or conversely, you get so focused on trying to knock down Fast Freddy because it's the thing that's popping up in front of you that you forget about the one at 300 that can still do you harm.
Hmm.
And so everybody's focused on Fast Freddy, right? Because it's right there and it's popping up constantly. They're not looking down the road at what the benefits are going to be. They can't look long term. They can't see far out. They can't plan for long term. And
That's been one of my mantras about the political ideology that just got its proverbial posterior orifice placed in its hands. They're in the well, started at the beginning at the strategy level.
mhm,
There doesn't seem to be anything other than an immediacy to whatever plan comes out of the strategy that they've put together. And then
right.
as they go through and have to execute, you see a whole nother level of ineptness and incompetence. And then when it comes to the entire mess being a pain for everyone that they also have to participate in cleanup, it's a
Yeah.
complete disaster. And that again goes back to my point when I was asking you about discipline.
Mhm.
Strategy, if you don't plan and you don't have a strategic orientation to the direction that you want to go and the
Yeah.
steps that it's going to take to get there, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
and you sit and you carefully consider them, analyze them, and vet them to the point where you have as high degree of probability as possible, and
Hmm.
consider as much of the risk associated. Do your risk mitigation planning. If you're
Yeah.
not even thinking about those words, you're fucked. If those words are not in your vocabulary,
Right.
in what you're trying to do, forget it.
Yeah.
You're not going to. Your chances of success are at least diminished 80+%.
Yeah.
And that's not some kind of speculation, hyperbole, or anything. That
Yeah.
is documented scientific fact that has been
Right.
recorded for decades of extremely successful people,
Yep.
companies, countries, leaders, institutions, that when there's a disciplined approach to
Mhm.
understanding where you want to go and how do you get there, and you plan and you take a strategic orientation and vision
Yeah.
towards your goal, and you
Right.
do it just based on simple metrics. This is scientific method
Yeah.
modeling, right?
Right.
And I think that that's what, to me, is part of this great reveal right now. Yeah, the all of the extremes of the data mining and finding and what's popping up and out, and the absurdity of the majority of it is so shocking that, yeah, it sucks all the oxygen out of the air. But
Yeah.
the underlying ripple, or not even a ripple, it's a seismic shake up, in my opinion. We're going to
Mm.
see a tsunami of this vibe of people waking up to the orientation of thinking through what the hell it is that you need to do
Yeah.
in order to achieve whatever your goal is, no matter how noble or idiotic, it matters not. The,
Right.
the successful ones in either direction, they plan, and why do they plan? Because they think that it's going to make a difference.
Right. Yeah. I mean, no, you're definitely right on that. And I mean, and that kind of applies everywhere. I mean, it's not just in what we're trying to achieve
Everything,
in terms everything's that way, whether it's
everything.
a big system that you're working on, or it's, attacking cleaning the house, or working on your car. Go in with a plan, stick to your plan, have a strategy. And I think that's one of the things too, is that, like, it's interesting, you look at things and there is not a lot of obvious chatter on what's the plan, what's the strategy with some of these things that are going on, right?
I think
And
that that's
people,
part of the strategy.
that's what I think too, because
That's
and here's what I think. I think some of it's a big part of the strategy, because it's kind of like, all right, so there's an old joke, and there might be some truth to it. It may be purely apocryphal, but you have you have this German officer is getting interrogated, right? World War II, or following World War II. They're asking about stuff. And, it's like, you know, German military, you guys, for the most part, pretty efficient, effective at what you do. You have some hangups, obviously, with getting command from higher and having to have things approved. But like, what's what's the biggest thing that has been your problem, and or biggest difficulty you had in dealing with American forces? And the German officer comes back and says, war is chaos. The Americans are masters of chaos. And there's another one that kind of expounds upon that, though, and it ends up going talking to the German guy, and it's like, oh yeah, the Americans are master of chaos, this, that, and the other thing. They have a similar thing coming from the Soviets. And then they ask the American GI, and he's like, because all these guys are like, they don't follow the rules, they don't listen to their own doctrines, their own strategy, they just do whatever. And they talk to the American guy, and the American guy's like, doctrine, shit, if I don't know what I'm doing, how the hell are they going to know what I'm doing? Like, like there's and in a way that is a strategy. If you
Absolutely.
if you hold your cards close to vest, and they don't know, because the more you put it out there, the more you talk about it in the news, the more you say, well, we have this 5-step plan, and we're going to run first. Well, now you're telling them everything you're going to do, and everything
but
you're
what they
trying to see
do,
that can counter it.
exactly, and what they do, and has been the tactic for eons, is deflection, right? You
Yeah.
want to get people paying attention to this while you're doing this over here, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, that is, that's fuckery 101, right? That's what happens in the course of things. The
The old
key,
rope-a-dope.
yeah, the key is the mastered levels of that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because that's where you start getting into this multidimensional, strategic thought screwery, the
Mm-hmm.
5D chess, as people refer to it as, right?
Yeah.
Um, when you can get to the
Everybody's saying
level,
4D and 5D chess, man. I just remember when it was 3D chess on Star Trek. I don't.
yeah, that's the first thing I'd see too, and it was so cool. You
Right.
look at it
Yeah.
and went, "How in the hell do you play that?"
That's
Um,
difficult enough. 4D and 5D. Good God. I don't even.
well, I think we're both talking about the same thing, and I think we're seeing the same thing, which is not unexpected for me in thinking about having a conversation with you
Mhm.
about this subject. I'm seeing, and I think that one of the reasons it's a good topic to have a conversation about is
Yeah.
because of the plethora of it everywhere. It's
Mhm.
ubiquitous. We're seeing this, and I think I mentioned this. Yeah, it was on one of the last conversations you and I had with Karen, and I
Mhm.
said that I think whether Elon has stumbled onto Doge or has been planning it for a long time, he's going to be able to package that shit and take it to any country and any company around the world and
Oh yeah.
own this space. He will
Yeah.
be the corporate cleaner,
Right.
uh, the country cleaner. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, if people don't see the magnitude of what the transformative change is that's going to
Mhm.
come as the result of, and it's not the findings, it's the system and the processes that is what's so magical. The
Yeah.
findings, the stuff is going to be found, it's going to be adjudicated, it's going to be dealt with, and it's going to be taken care of. And then from there,
Right.
the chances of that sketchy, nefarious stuff
Hmm.
won't have the opportunity to manifest. It'll be
Yeah.
so much more difficult for the systems to end up in that same chaotic, corrupted, clogged up cacophony of crap that has
Yeah.
infected every system that we use to inhabit and navigate society.
Hmm.
So that is a transformation on a level that I don't think people see
Yeah.
coming, and it's going to be awesome to watch it unfold. And
It'll.
speaking of
It's
Karen,
definitely going to be interesting.
look who is joining us. It is her It is she who must be spoken to with great delicacy and respect.
Uh-oh.
Thank you very much.
Your mic's a little low. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you okay. I'll speak
Oh,
up a little bit louder.
that's better. That's better. How are you, my dear?
I'm very excited, my dear. How are you doing?
We are having a kind of a geek gab
Okay.
going on about all of the magnificent changes that are happening within the systems and the interactions and transactions through technologies. And people really, it was interesting when Jason and I first started talking about discipline. I was like, well, let's talk about, what does discipline mean? Well, it means, kind of shit needs to be on it and consistent and repeatable, and you work at it. We spun off into all of the stuff that's happening, that we're watching, all of the places where discipline has been lacking severely, if not missing altogether, totally cranked in the opposite direction, because getting things done has been one of the bane of society for all
Mm,
of us as everything changes. And
yeah.
Jason just talked about how he has to do his little Monday report, the 5 things he did last week.
It's ready to go, hot off the press. You ready to go, Jason?
Yeah, I'm definitely noticing, as sometimes it's kind of like, we kind of chuckle about it. There's actually some goodness in it, because it's one of those things where I very much get into a tendency of just operating, right? I get in, I'm doing my job, I'm thinking about what specifically I have to do about my job. I don't really do a whole lot to record specifically what I am doing. So, if you want to talk about doing, performance or, report type stuff with the boss, you're doing reviews, performance reviews and things like that. Like, I I kind of suck at talking about myself and what I do.
Wait, hold on, time out. I've had many conversations to the
Process what?
contrary. I'd just like to interject that that's not always accurate, but proceed.
I'm gonna have to.
Where do you go from that kind of
I'm
interjection?
gonna have to think on that one, and I may have to ask for example.
Yeah,
But
I knew you would. Yeah.
but uh, but no, when it talks about like performance of things that I'm doing and the things that I'm working on, I have a hard time keeping track of that, because I'm not geared to keeping that kind of tab on myself, because
So
I'm just trying to do.
yeah, it would be safe to say that you are task oriented, not tab oriented.
Sure, yeah. Even though my browser typically has like 4 million tabs open. Um,
Tab management is a whole different subject. So go ahead.
right, yeah. So like in that regard, it does help me, because I do have to stop and sit there and be like, okay, hold on, wait a minute. What have I done? And
Mhm.
then it gets challenging too, because what I do as a historian, right? I Over the course of a year, I gather source documents, and gather primary source documents, and conduct oral history interviews with commanders and of the organization, and I have to compile an annual history report, right? And so there's a lot of very mundane tasks in that, right? And it's like, okay, so I spent Tuesday going through, however many hundreds of documents for this particular topic that I've, gathered or whatever, and I'm
Mhm.
having to number them, because we have a very specific numbering regimen that we have to do with our source documents for when it all gets loaded in the flat file. And that way it's easy to reference.
That's
And
then put on the hard copy and taken down to the mind.
right, yeah, sure, exactly. And next to the Ark of the Covenant, and so it's like it's very mundane, right? And so you get looking at it, and it's like, well, I already put something on my thing last week about source document numbering, but it's like something that I do every week.
Mhm.
Or hey, I've been working on an article related to warrant officers coming back to the Air Force, and how my organization's getting three of the we had the very first warrant officer to walk across the stage and graduate come to our organization from the class that graduated back in December, which was the first accessioning of warrant officers that the Air Force has done in 66 years. Because in 1958 they stopped accessioning new warrant officers. They basically let that particular career track die out through natural attrition for people
Jason,
retiring or just leaving.
Right.
Jason, for
Yeah.
those of us who have no idea what you just said,
Okay.
what
warrant
is this ascension? What does this mean?
Oh, accessioning.
Accessioning. What does that mean?
You basically, somebody who's enlisted goes, once they hit a certain point and they can apply to be a warrant officer, or if they went to go to OCS, the Officer Candidate School or whatever, to become a commissioned officer, which is a different kind of officer. They're more generalists. Warrant officers are technical. It's basically just taking those people who apply, putting them through the program, and then minting them as either officers or warrant officers.
So how do you pronounce it? Ascension?
Accessioning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Accessioning just says you've gone through boot camp and now you can qualify to go do some other officer type stuff.
It's more of just the process of elevating that person up to the higher rank level, and it's I could probably use a better term that's less confusing. That's just
I'm sorry. I was when you said that, it sounded like a Masonic ceremony or something.
Well, I mean, I am pretty biased about warrant officers since I was one in the Army, but I'm not that biased about warrant officers. There's nothing messianic about it. No, so it's assessing new candidates to being, into the program to become officers or warrant officers, stuff like that. So
is there in that ascension? I'm sorry, why do I want to say ascension? In that process,
easier to say.
In that process, is there an audit to that process in order to vet it, validate
you go
it?
through you go through a whole training course, and so there's an educational and training aspect to it, and you have to graduate from the course.
Keep score of your ass as you go through the process, and you must tally ho at the end so that you can ascend or
be assessed into the ranks of that officer or warrant officer track. And so like I've been working on an article talking about all that stuff, and so it's like I've already talked about that. I did some more work on this particular portion of the annual history report. I organized these new, we have a whole new filing and shelving and system and stuff in the office. So it's like these things where it's like I'm putting these really mundane things in there that like happen every day. And like, there's a part of me that's sitting there is like, dude, is there some dude up at DOD in the Doge office going through this stuff and be like, all this guy does is number source documents. So, like I have those thoughts as I'm sitting here trying to like type out what I'm doing, but like it's all critical to being able to make sure that the documents are easily researchable later, and things like that when people read the annual history.
Is there a certain amount of sphincter spasmodic condition going on when you send this in, or when you're filling it out?
Yes, they're and it's just replying to an email from OSD, and so I'm just sitting there, and it's like, as per DoD guidance, here's the 5 things I did this past week. And so because like I don't sit there and normally like have a tally book going of like, okay, I numbered exactly this many source documents, I answered this many requests for information, I answered this many FOIAs. Like I don't keep a running log because like, man, I'm doing. So,
and because you're task oriented, you know what your task is. B, you approach it with the intent to get that task done and out of the way to move on to the next.
Certainly try to.
So once you know the task is done, why think about it again? You've already got a new one to work on, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's like basically I'm writing a mini book every year is basically how it ends up working out, like in terms of writing and data collection and stuff. And so it's like, can you have me answer this like 3 months from now? Can we do this quarterly instead? Like,
Oh, you mean like the 100 days it takes to move an icon on a website up to a corner of a page? I mean, come on.
Are
Karen,
you getting
did you hear
what?
about that?
But which part? The court?
Uh,
No, maybe not. No, I was just going to ask. So if you're going to put these reports in and do your, what did I do for, 5 things?
yeah,
Are they actually responding back to anyone? I haven't heard anyone getting responses back. So I'm like, does
no,
the
but like, so one of the things though, because like, I was talking about, like, I kind of mentioned, like performance reports, performance reviews with your boss kind of thing, stuff like that. So when you send these up, you actually CC your boss on it.
I was going to
So,
ask, why not just give it to them and put it up the chain of command? But
right. I'm sure some of it is also to
what?
see, like, if there's a pulse in the chair. You know what I mean?
and
But
to that, I mean,
yeah.
do you think that's a valid check? A sign of life
Um,
check is probably not a bad and very easy thing to do.
Easy to
okay,
check.
so it's a very easy thing to do. I don't think it's inherently bad from the D from my foxhole, the level that I work at.
Mhm.
And Professor, we talked about this earlier, and I talked about what I've seen, everybody that I've ever known that's been a civilian employee for the DoD, they go in, they do their job, they work hard,
Right.
they do the typically, 99% of them are doing the right thing and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and all of that stuff. And, even when it was they were working from home after COVID, because like, so where I work is such a tech heavy thing, they were like, hey, you know what? We've been just as productive while everybody's been out on COVID because they're the ones who actually got everything started so that like the rest of DoD could actually telework and hold meetings and do all their stuff efficiently, right? Like they got the models put together and they packaged it up and pushed it out and said, hey, we got this platform, here's what we're doing, right? And they got it approved through, going through the system. And they did it like in a really rapid, really a short amount of time. So that way, everything didn't come to a grinding halt while we're all like, camping out in our houses and
Mhm.
wearing 12 masks while we're driving. And like,
You
so
You didn't. Tell me you didn't. That would kill me.
right, yeah. So like I think as far as doing a pulse check from what I've seen within DoD, it's not quite as necessary. Other organizations I can't speak for, but I know with the things that I've dealt with, you know, long wait times to get to talk to anybody about any problem with, for a while there, the VA. The VA has actually been getting steadily better. Like I have very few complaints about the VA. But just other, agencies that IRS, whoever, like, there's long wait times for stuff and all of that. Like, so you kind of get like, maybe, but for where I work, no, I don't think it's even really necessary to do that because every cubicle's full,
Well,
everybody's in there doing what they're supposed to be
that
doing.
sounds like a good Govey Bury
Did we have
crack kind of thing.
positions not getting though? I mean, being paid or being subterfuged or, I mean, good gosh, they funneled enough stuff through whatever trillions of dollars in attrition crap. So
Not
I
where
think
I'm at.
not
Well,
probably where you, but there are positions and stuff in there. I'm still getting over the new one. Like aside from people getting Social Security when they're 9 months old or 120, but the new
Yeah.
one is that people that you haven't even been born yet,
Yeah.
mhm.
and they're getting like checks, and I'm like, they're what? Let me
Yes.
just
Right. And that's somebody who's gone in and figured out how to game the system. You know what I mean? Like that's that kind of stuff. But
Well, that goes back to what you and I were talking about earlier, Jason.
mhm,
The
yeah.
reason that they've been able to game the system is because the system is designed to be gamed. It isn't, it was
I'm
never
not even,
designed
you
to
know
be
what?
accountable or auditable. It was designed
So here's
so
what
that
here's
it would be as easy as possible to push shit wherever you wanted,
yeah.
and knowing that it was also on old complicated systems. with
Right.
the
Well, and
idea that, well,
I
nobody's
can
ever going to be able to find this until somebody like
I can
Elon and
understand
the
I can
Doge dude
understand
show up
coming to
with
that
the
conclusion.
latest tools.
I can understand coming to that conclusion. And again, my view is going to be purely within DoD, things that I observed when I was in the Army, things that I've observed now as I'm a civilian working for the Air Force. Like the things, here's what I think. I don't think there's anything in there, at least at the operator level, right, that was ever designed to be easily gameable. I think that there's a lot of things in there where you have somebody who wants, oh, hey, we have this new technology. We're getting computers. Okay, let's do something that's efficient and makes work go faster and all of this. Like, okay, cool. And so you have that, but technology has just moved faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, right? And so what it really feels like is that there's a lot of things where people have put things together to do something good and great and help out the process and help out systems and make things more efficient. But it's like you stack up too many things and it clogs up the works. Like we've
Now, wait a
made
minute, are
too
you
many
saying,
good things.
are you talking about the stack of things being the things that are being put in place to unstack the stack, or are you
No, I'm
talking
talking
about
about how the
what's
stack
already
got
in?
built.
Yeah, the stuff that's already in the stack.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like, if you already look at the stack of everything that's already been made and used, I think there's a lot of things where it's somebody identified some way to do something better. And so somebody comes up with this thing, a contracted company or whatever
And they get
comes
some
up with this
baling
thing.
wire and some bubble gum and they attach it and they hook it up.
Right.
And
Which is why, like talking about earlier, how I was like, I would log into one website and be able to access two things without having to log in. And then everything else, I'd have to log in like 3 times to 4 different places. And it's like, why am I doing this? Like because somebody, the good idea fairy came along, came up with something that they thought would genuinely be good and useful. And then it gets baling wire and bubble gummed on and it gums up the works. I think that's what a whole lot of it is. Rather than being like, okay, so here's the deal. We are going to an entirely new system. You need to keep working this system until June of 19 whatever or 20 whatever. And we're bringing all of this online. We're going to migrate all of the information from this over to this. That's kind of a big thing to do in a lot of ways. Now it's a little easier because technology's gotten better. Programming's gotten better.
It's
but
not only a big thing to do in a lot of ways, it's never been done before. What we're seeing is something
or it's never been done before
unprecedented.
without problems. I mean, not at this level, not at the massive scale that we're seeing now.
This is a global reset
Yeah.
in the transactional systems that enable us to engage with society in reality. All of these things, and this is what's so amazing to me, where I mean, the wind in the sail gets blown hard when I start thinking about how all of the technology that's needed, all of the systems, all of the models, all of the design for not only the provenance of your own shit and having some level of sovereignty over it, but you having the control and the security over it. I mean, if you look at the whole idea of privacy and security, we are basically in the wild, wild west from the standpoint of the way the technology and the systems that we've been talking about are deployed and the way that we use them, the way they are employed and how we interact with them. That's just wild, wild west shit.
And I think they're trying to rope a lot of that in. I think they've been trying to rope a lot of it in for a while. And that's why you look at like all the stuff with, and this is all open source. You can go look it up, but like crypto modernization, right? All the stuff with that has been a steady, building block thing of getting to a point where we have really good security and we understand how to deal with issues. Same with zero trust, which is another thing. You can sit there and you can look it up. It's all, a lot of it's open source.
That's blockchain. Blockchain is what they call trustless. You don't have to have trust in it because you can only trust it.
Right. And it's multiple levels of authentication and things like that that are going on within the system as you're trying to access things, you know, and it's all happening basically real time from what I can understand. Um, I
Yeah.
was just an Army guy. My manuals are written at an 8th grade reading level. You know, but like, you know, so we're working to get there and we've been actively working to try to get there, you know, but there's a lot of things that have to be undone
And that's
in
the point you
general.
made earlier, I completely agree with. There, I think what's happening is they know that this system is about to, they're holding it up until they can make the transition to
Yeah.
enough of a new system to where it'll mitigate the pain of that complete transition.
Right.
But all
Which
of
is,
the stuff
which is
is in
how it
place for
should be
this.
done. Like and it sucks, you know, when your muffler's tied on by baling wire and you know you're sitting there dumping radiator fix in so you're not leaking down the like, you know, but
Days of
man,
STP are long
one more
gone.
month of paychecks, man, and I'll have my new whatever. Like, you know, right. It's transmission on an old Dodge, right? Like we're
Have one of
Three
those.
of my 4 gears work and I can still get there.
right, exactly. You know, and it sucks when you're in that stage.
Yeah.
But on the other end of that stage is where everything is going to be working how it's supposed to work or was
That's
intended to
amazing.
work again, you know, until that becomes antiquated. And I think one of the big things is that we're going to get through this and we're going to have a bunch of stuff that's going to be high speed, low drag. It's going to work really well, but we are going to have to be constantly on top of it because everything moves so quickly now
Well,
that
the
if
thing
we
is
don't,
if you the thing yeah, exactly. If you're not on top of it, it will be on top of you. In fact, it's
right.
already on top of you now, but
Yeah.
this new system will also enable the filtering of the feed of what it is that you want and need to interact with. So there will
Yeah.
be a level, kind of a, force field kind of thing, maybe if you want to use that metaphor, of you will be able to, with all of the data, all of the deluge of the digital data that we are not only now completely buried by, but we're only
Yeah.
seeing the beginning of the crest of the tsunami over the horizon of what's coming.
Right. Yeah.
And that deluge is, you're going to have to manage it. You're going to have to mitigate its impact on you and maximize the data that
Yeah.
you want. And these systems will be able to provide that,
Right. Well, and that's why,
which
like,
I'm really excited about because I want to sit back in my whole little, holler room
right.
and just
And
be looking at shit, picking it up and going, let's see more of this. What's that? Have some of this. Make one of those.
I'm getting more excited about things like AI. You know, like I had the concerns about, you know, what's this going to do to jobs? What's this going to do? Like you know, I still have some of those things, but after you and I had our conversation a couple of months ago,
Hmm.
you know, and whatnot, so we have a thing where the folks from up at SAF-CN, which is like our higher headquarters that we report that we're reporting to, right? Um, you know, they have these weekly, you know, meetings. We all, you know, hop on Teams and we all listen to these briefings and stuff like that, and they talk about what's going on in the organization, et cetera. And you know, there's typically, you know, everyone, you know, every couple of weeks or so, they have somebody like brief on something.
Mhm.
And so the guy briefed on AI, an AI system that they call the AI First Sergeant. They can upload all of the regulations into this, and then an airman can go into the tool. They've already basically programmed a synthetic personality into it to replicate, you know, a first sergeant in the Air Force, which deals a lot with personnel. You know, first sergeant in the Air Force is very different than first sergeant in the Army in what they do, which took me some getting used to. But but
Is it a downgrade or
The
up?
difference. I don't get. I mean,
it's so a first sergeant in the Army at the company level, you have a first sergeant who is like the chief non-commissioned officer
mhm.
over all of the enlisted personnel. And then you have your company commander. And so the company commander and the first sergeant are like a team, right? Company commander is like coming up with, here's what we need to do, you know, go forth, yea, verily, and execute. The
Mhm.
first sergeant makes sure that all of that stuff's running. Well, in the Air Force, it's the chiefs that do that. And the first sergeant deals with more of all the personnel issues. And so in the Army, it's all of it. With the Air Force, they have it separated between two positions. So it's not really a downgrade or a step down. It's a lateral movement, if you will. Yeah. And so, an airman can go into this tool and they can ask a question, that is probably covered by a regulation. And I'll just use the goofy example that they use, which was, hey, can I wear a backpack in uniform? And, you ask that question and it comes back and it's like, hey, so short answer is yes. But, here's all of the regulations that cover all the instances where you can or can't, or, where there's specific rules about it, etc.
Which tool are they using, or which do you know? Was it chat or what?
I forget. It's what is it that Nipper GPT is running on? Something 4, AI 4 or whatever.
Well, Chat GPT is 4.0 right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Claude and Sonnet, and
I think it's something through Microsoft.
Well, that's going to be OpenAI, or that's going to be ChatGPT. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but don't quote me on that. I can find out for you. But
so you were demonstrating that you could just ask that question in this, and
it can come back and give you an answer, kind of like you're talking to a first sergeant. And
what was the reaction to that?
Well, like there are plenty of people who are like, "Hey, this is great." There's some like crusty old NCOs and people who don't like change that are all like, right? Because you're going to have that. But then, so my coworker Dan and I, he's our curator for our Heritage Center. We work in the same office. So he handles all the artifacts and displays. I handle all the writing and the maintaining of the histories. So him and I got talking about this, and he's like, this sounded a lot like what you and I kind of had conversations about. Timer just went out. My porch light. Sorry. But because I kind of talked to him about like, I would love to see something where we could upload all of our historical documents and we could research it quickly and easily. And, all the source documents that we gather through a year, we can feed into that, and it can assist us in writing our annual history reports. And then that frees up, we do that more efficiently, and that frees up more time to do all the teaching about unit history that commanders and the airmen love.
That's what you and I were talking about a couple of months ago.
Right, exactly. And so this guy gives this briefing about this thing, and Dan and I are talking about it, and I'm like, dude, I'm going to reach out to him. And so I just hopped into the Teams chat, and he had been in there, when he gave the brief and everything, and I just clicked on his thing and I shot him a message, and I was like, hey, so here's who I am, here's where I'm at. We saw your stuff on the AI first sergeant, like, we think that this might have a lot of potential in our field. And guy came back and he's like, yeah, dude, let's sit it down and talk about it. I think actually, a history program would be a great use case for this. And, because the way we look at it is, so not only could it help me, write annual history reports or do white papers or studies, more efficiently. Because I can, we feed all the data into it, and then we could rapidly find it just by doing queries and whatnot. But if we build a certain level of analytics into it, we can start finding things where it's like, hey, we've uploaded the last 90 years of command histories into our system. What's the history of units trying to use this particular type of technology or this particular type of piece of equipment, and what were the results, what were the pitfalls, all of that stuff. We can put that in there when we're querying, and it can go through 90 years of history and find correlations and things like that, and figure out, like, one of the things that we've talked about is especially since like Prof I had mentioned earlier, like, we're super IT heavy. That's what we do, right? We're the cyberspace capability center, and we're operating with IT as an enterprise service. And so, like, for a while there, you have a lot of these units, especially like back during COVID and following after COVID, where there were regulations that kind of got changed to allow organizations to sort of commercial off the shelf stuff and get things, program wise, systems wise, that they could use at their level. And, then you'd have somebody else trying to develop and get a similar kind of thing at a different organization. Well, none of these guys are talking.
Yeah.
And so it's like now you're having a duplication of efforts. And so like we can take all of these histories, from the various units that have been associated with this and all this information and things like that, plug it in, and it can find those instances of, hey, we've got a whole lot of duplication of effort going on here. So like we could actually, utilizing history and source documents using the AI, we could actually, help the chain of command make real-time decisions with information rapidly gathered and compiled. And so it in a way, and it's a goofy way of putting it, I guess, but it's like weaponizing the history office for the force. And the guy's like, yeah, no, definitely we can do something like, and so he helped us put together the use case paper and he submitted it for us. So now we're just waiting to hear back if we're going to get accepted into the pilot program for it. But it's like, wow. I'm excited.
That is awesome. Congratulations.
Right? I am stoked. I am like, I check my Teams thing like every morning. I'm like
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got 5 things this week. That's great.
Well, yeah, but I already talked about that like 2.5 weeks ago.
So you've already dropped this into your reports, your weekly reports, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So when you drop the one that says pilot project approved or whatever it is,
right,
we are now going in, and basically you can say,
yeah,
you're doging history.
That's freaky. That's freaky.
That's funny.
Yeah, but seriously, but that's what it is. It's going to go. All it's going to do is interrogate that data based on whatever query you ask it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's like AI.
And like, there was concerns. So back last summer, I went to Langley and Air Combat Command, which like right now we kind of are owned by Air Combat Command. We're kind of owned by SAF-CN, which is Secretary of the Air Force Cyber something or like Cyber Networks or something. I can never remember what the CN stands for. No matter how many times I write it down or try, it just doesn't stick. But like, so because we technically fall under, ACC, Air Combat Command, like the MAJCOMs, the major commands. So like ACC, a lot of them will have historian conferences, right? And so they'll pull historians who want to come. They have a big group. We all sit around a table and we all talk about challenges that we're facing, ideas of how we can improve the system, talk about some cool history stuff. We meet other historians so we can network that way. If we see something that, oh, hey, this guy over here might have something, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there was a guy who was talking about AI. And like a lot of people were kind of like, yeah, okay. Like they weren't excited about it. I was a little concerned because it's like, well, like if we did this with the history program and we went like AI, it could totally Skynet on us and then we'll be out of the job, right? Like, because, why do you need a historian? But the historian understands the context of things and understands where to look for and like, how to look for things. So it's like, eventually, will it get to a point where a computer will do everything that a historian does? Sure, but it's a long way off because you don't have that experiential interface, input rather coming from the historian, mm-hmm. and how to ask the questions and how to query, how to submit those queries to the system for the kinds of things that we're looking for. And so it's like, I remember him just sitting there talking about it, and he had a whole little thing up on the screen, and people were just kind of like, yeah, okay. And they saw it more of like we can use it to write our term paper, like, college students think, but it's we can do that, but we can do so much more if the system is set up right and we know how to query the system.
Right. And to that point, Jason, I want to share, hopefully you can see my screen there.
Uh-huh. Right?
So this is a new series that I just released over the last week. And it's a playlist of a number of different aspects of AI, thinker or linker. And the reason I've put this part together is to help demystify this whole shit and get all of the FUD out of it. but to get people to realize what you can actually do with it.
Right.
And so I'll send you this link. I'll put it in the description, or in the chat in the description. But there's a number of different, and these are shorts. These are somewhere, the longest one's like 20 minutes, but these are all different aspects of the way that AI actually functions. And it's
Hmm.
basically the same conversation you and I had a couple of months ago when I was
Right.
explaining that no, this is an interrogation system.
Right.
It's like the next level Alexa, Series, Google, all that bullshit
Yeah.
but it's on steroids with a different model. But
Right.
the biggest problem that this stuff has right now,
Right.
they've run out of data.
No.
You've reached the end of the internet.
Well, they've reached the end of the data that these systems have been designed to be
Acquisition.
targeted and go on index.
Right.
Because the real-time capacity, and this is also in that AI Thinker or Linker playlist, is
Mm.
the whole idea of intelligences. Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about the different intelligences that we have as humans. We have a
Hmm.
survival. We have a linguistic intelligence. We have a social.
Right. Emotional attention. It's so social and
We have
emotional.
all
Like,
these different intelligences that there is no program, there is no code for.
right.
You can't do those things in this whole construct of where they've used to create what we are calling AI, which is nothing more than little expert systems that are designed to be as efficient and as accurate as possible on a specific task. That's all
Right.
they are, right? They can mimic emotions, they can mimic character, they can mimic these things, but they don't have any of the organic intelligences to
Hmm.
create it naturally or to create it all, let alone innovate. All it does is come up with patterns and unique patterns that maybe
Yeah.
we haven't identified before. And people, you can argue whether that's a creation or is it a find of
Right.
what's actually occurred within the data that's available.
Yeah.
But to consume real-time sensory data in the next, not the now, in the next, because we're always in the next, there's always more information happening.
Yeah.
The only way that that can be even experienced, let alone processed and analyzed and adapted to, is in an
Yeah.
organic form.
Right.
Silica ain't organic, and it can't.
Yeah.
And it's beyond the thinking when you try to create something that you experience but you yourself can't define.
Hmm.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Because
One of the things that I'm really excited about too, though, is that with this system and trying to get it on this pilot program, is that I can upload all the data into it. It's not something that's like pulling from the internet,
no, you
right?
will have your own LLM.
Right. So
That's what makes the
yes,
magic happen. You define the data you want
Journal.
to have that
right.
interrogation performed
And
on.
so it's not something that would sit there and get confused by the plethora of crazy crap that's floating out on the interweb.
It won't. The
It won't have to deal with it.
hallucinatory things that AI
Right.
does all the time, all of this weird shit. That was
Right.
one of the things that I talk about in one of these pieces is, can you imagine if they unleashed AI onto the current net? It would crash itself.
Yeah. It would crash
Because
itself on purpose. That's what,
it would be a self-imposed, oh my God, what is this? How do I
Yeah,
analyze? How
suicide.
do I
right.
reason? Where does this go? That doesn't make sense. Oh shit. It would
Like, I'm
literally
out.
pull, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's an important distinction that people don't, there's not enough
Yeah.
conversation about the fact that it's a linker and it only
Well,
has
and
computational
honestly,
aspect of intelligence, not the rest of the ones that make us human.
if you look at everything as a society, right, that we have been exposed to when it comes to things like artificial intelligences, right? It's all of these sci-fi things, right? And so that's kind of everybody's like preconceived notion about it. But
No, that's
it's
not just
just
that.
like
It's a bunch of it's people's imaginary field of curiosity and wonder and
Well, that too. Yeah,
making up
absolutely.
shit based on,
Right.
well, we could have a HAL 9000 Terminator Singularity if we
Right.
don't pay attention to what we're doing here. Oh yeah,
But
okay.
at the
No,
same time, though,
not gonna
like
happen.
it's easy because of those things. It's easy to forget that it is a machine. And what does a machine do? A machine does what you tell it to do. Whether it's a sickle bar being drugged behind a tractor, or it's a friggin a whole room full of supercomputers doing things, running programs. We are telling it what to do. We're giving it the commands, right? We're inputting the things. It's a machine. Machines do what they are told to do.
That's
And
performance.
right,
What's that, Karen? What'd you say?
If we just look at it in some way, like in a simplistic, is it's just task orientated, or like what you're talking about, it doesn't have to take jobs. Like, I mean, I was just looking at something that was AI program that was actually laying down marble tile on the floor, and it had the whole entire room done. But that's the task it was designed to perform, or anything that would be very entered. Do you need more grout? Do you need whatever?
Right.
If those are the parameters placed within there are other things. I was talking with Tony Pantloresco, and this afternoon I was on with Ryan Velli and his crew. We have a new one. He called it TAA, Truth Addicts Anonymous. But anyway, plug for Ryan Velli and Tony Pantloresco. But one of the things Tony was mentioning is they had run the AI and run a simulation program, and it was apparently being done by some generals. I don't know if it was Army or Air Force, wherever it was, but it basically went and locked them out. Wanted them to do something, and it locked them out. He said, that scares the crap out of me. So again, it's nice when you get the parameters, but if it decided it said it wanted to shut it down, you do this, whatever, shut it down, and it locked them out behind some sort of a wall.
right.
Well, see,
I was
all
like,
of that's all conditional logic, though, that has to be written in.
Right. Exactly.
It couldn't have locked them out unless that was written into the system.
Right. It's like somebody programmed a fail safe in.
yeah,
Yeah. So,
but when you're just sitting there as a user doing, messing with it, and you don't know all of the stuff that goes into it, it's like, oh crap, this thing just locked me out. Like,
I mean,
you
right
gotta,
now, and people, they get their fur all ruffled and feathers fluffed about, this is my privacy and it's my data and all the shit. It's like, you don't realize that your shit is scattered across dozens, if not hundreds, of systems
a
all
great
over
example.
the fucking planet. Number one. Number
Right.
two, it's your data about you, but God help you if you forget your fucking password.
Right.
It's no longer your data, and you can't get it.
You know what I got is on the DNA stuff. So, I mean, as we all know about the birth certificates, right? And I think now they've locked most people out. But I mean, at one time when I got into this 15 years ago, I'm like, where's my data? Oh, it's going from here, this BC thing, this Canada bullshit thing is going to what? To the embassy in, New York is going into this and then into Puerto Rico. And I was like, by the time people are just getting into that now. I was in this like 20 years ago. And now what was worse was that social frickin' insurance number, right? And I was doing people, and of course you can't get it, but the utilities for the GEIU that they were using out of the Netherlands, and it looked like labs, right? So they were taking DNA in labs, right? Most people I would find 100, 200, 300, 400, but I had one of the guys that was RCMP, but also a vet for the Canadian Army, and they had his stuff tied to 4,600 placement units. I'm like, what are you doing with that DNA and data?
Right.
I had never seen anything so high ever in my life. And now you can't access hardly any of this stuff, or you got to get behind a password. But back then when I started looking at this, I'm like, that's a lot of stuff to be like messing with. And then when you start knowing about how it could be used, different timelines, Stargate, Jade, Skynet, J2, all those things, I'm going, this could be really nefarious. Like, this is really bad.
Well, but that's the thing, though, is like
to find it now. Can you imagine what we could do if we use that stuff to track where those things were taken?
Yeah.
On that end.
But it's it's interesting, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier.
I'm
Prof,
gonna refill my water. I'll be right back. You guys keep going.
Oh, okay. Um, about the data being everywhere and all this stuff, like everybody freaking out about Doge and Musk going into systems and stuff like that, and Elon said it really great, and like I think he said it like a month ago in in an interview. He's like, if I was trying to get everybody's personal data, I would have done it when I was at PayPal.
Like, we're used it variously that way, like, and I've heard enough stuff too. Is it even him, or I mean, it's obviously 2.0, 3.0, or whatever it is. And I mean, I've heard that he is the Neuralink, like, it, but whatever it is, I mean, that entity, call it whatever, who's running him, I mean, they're going in, they're cleaning house. Like, I mean, you cannot be impressed by the amount of, fraud that they have done. Not only just fraud, but I mean, it's not even the money thing. It's how they've suppressed and oppressed people through this technology. And if there's a way to biohack it back, it needs to be cleaned out. And I like the idea of what you were talking about, putting in that kind of data that would help you guys, with the antiquity museum and the, history, and a lot of decisions are made on what we've done before, or where's the part where we've got this, like, is there duplicity? I mean, I could see in your field, holy my gosh, if you could eliminate a lot of duplicity. Or last time we were talking, and I do want to see what your place looks like, because I'm really curious to see if you got any more cheeks. But anyway, that's good. Don't forget to ask.
I haven't done a whole lot. I've been pretty focused on work, and I'm a dork. I have a big rockabilly festival that I go to every year out in Vegas. Right. It's like 4 days long, and so like prep for that, it's like, okay, I've got to figure out, like, and I'm trying this year to like not be dragging 12 million pounds of like different outfits for different events, because like everybody's in vintage clothing or like retro stuff, and so everybody puts on their put their best foot forward kind of thing and wants to look cool and be a hep cat and all that, so it's like, but I'm like, I just want to go and hang out with my friends, so I'm like really trying to scale back how much crap I lug through the airport. And so like I've been like this or that, no, I'll go with this. Okay, do I also want it? No, put it back. Like it's very dorky and silly, but it's a lot of fun. But it's like lead up to that and all the packing and decision, like, oh, I got to get alterations made because I lost a bunch of weight, or like I've got to do this, or like running places all over. So I have not been focusing on getting Mikasa all done up as much here lately. I think the only thing since the last time we were talking,
you don't tell me you have not added another vintage appliance.
What I just asked him.
I have not added another vintage appliance, but probably the most interesting thing that I've done. So like, it's not just vintage, but it's also stuff that feels from like the atomic era and things like that. And if I can find there it is. So you go on Etsy and you can find the most amazing things, and you find people who are doing all kinds of 3D print projects, laser wood cutting projects and things like that. So they accidentally only sent there's supposed to be a total of 3 pieces on my wall. They accidentally only sent one of the pieces, so I have to get that other one from them, but I kind of got it set up. But so it's got these like atomic stars, right? And and it's done in wood, laser cut out of wood, and it's stained like walnut, and the centerpiece of it has this translucent like turquoise blue kind of panel in it. And so I looked at that and I was like, well, that'll look cool on the wall.
You'd go with the fridge.
and then right. And then I was like, oh wait, this is a translucent plastic material. I could have fun with this. So let's see. How do I do my backgrounds?
I don't know if I'm scared or interested to see what's going to happen now.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out now how if I can change it.
I want to see
Found
one of
it.
your outfits too now, Jason. I want to go, what does one wear to a rockabilly thing?
Right. Yeah. So there's one part of it. So this part here.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
So this part here, I'm actually going to move it up, right? And then I'll have another one of these pieces to go on this side. So it'll be kind of like this diagonal kind of thing going across. But
That's pretty cool. I
I
like that.
I dorked out. And let's see if I can get this to do this right.
There you go.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
So I
Lights?
put some
LED?
I put some LEDs in there. I was
Oh,
like, it would be really cool just to like, a little accent thing. It'd be fun. It is definitely not something from the 50s or whatever, but it has the feel of it. And
It's got kind
that's
of
the room.
it's got kind of a Southwest kind of vibe to it. Show that
Well,
again.
it's like
Because
the
it looks
atomic
like
stars. Like, well, color wise, yeah, it has
okay.
because
Well,
the
that looks like I
turquoise.
was going to say it looks like a petroglyph.
Yeah, but
yeah.
you see like the atomic stars, and then the lines,
Yeah.
and then I threw up this mirror. It's got that kind of funky.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we
That's
saw
that's
that.
very cool.
That's new. That's new production though. That's a new. I'd like because trying to find an antique one of these things would be dead. I'd be broke. But like to because now that you said I want to see some of the things that you wear. I'll just
Oh, here we go.
dig through it.
Fashion show. This is great.
I'm not putting anything on,
Bartender! Oh,
but I'll show some of the stuff that I have laid out. Let me see if I can pardon. This is my spare room, so pardon the kind of mess I've got going on in here. But like so, there's a bunch of us who are vets that are showing up. My friend Joe and I, we collect all the vintage World War II stuff. And so we're having a vet meet and greet. So I have my reproduction pinks and greens, World War II style laid out. I have to get all of my rank insignia and stuff put back on. But like
what era is that from?
the 40s.
So that's Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the era.
Yeah.
But it's not actually made then. This is actually like it's a reproduction from like, companies that do the living history and reenactment stuff. But like, so with this one, I found, a company that made the raw edge World War II style 10th Mountain Division patches because that was the unit, my combat unit. All of my collar brass. So like my US's, my warrant officer branch, Eagle Rising stuff. That and then so like during World War II, you had two chief warrant officer ranks. You had two warrant officer ranks. You had warrant officer junior grade and you had chief warrant officer. So this is the bar for chief warrant officer, and I was a chief warrant officer 3. So like I sourced original 40s rank, and then I thought about backdating my ribbons to show like European theater and Pacific theater stuff to but I was like, I didn't actually earn those, and I don't feel comfortable doing that, so I just didn't.
So when they will be happy. Got it.
But then, like, I found a guy who makes reproductions of the old Crusher caps. There was a company called Bancroft that made the Bancroft Flighter, as they called it, and it's crushable. So you could roll it up, like the bill is all flexible. He makes it all to spec. And even got permission to use the logo and everything on the inside. So it's all proper 40s. The warrant officer cap badge, that's from the 40s.
And Karen,
and then,
just so you know, Jason is also a master hat maker.
I'm not a master hat maker. I make some hats.
He makes awesome hats.
Well, I appreciate that. So I have my two-tone nubucks that I'll take with me. I have a loafer version over there. I've got my Hawaiian shirt for the tiki party. And yes, this is the correct color pattern for Magnum PI, if you were wondering. But then like delving just more into the rockabilly in general. I've got some like leopard print stuff. I've got
leopard print? Is that a onesie?
No, that's a shirt. And then like I have Levi's 501 jeans where when the inside of the material, they've printed leopard print. Yeah. I've got these Hollywood drop loot pants that's made by a company called Swanky's Vintage out of California. And so it's all basically built off the same styles and patterns that they used like in the 50s, where you were seeing a lot out there. Where they, and they'd put all the little accent trim on the, the pocket openings. And I've got kind of a knit button up shirt there that's got the cool atomic stars. And I've got a Ricky jacket, which I'm not sure how they came up with the name Ricky, but they call them Ricky jackets. And it's almost like an Eisenhower jacket. Like it's like a waist jacket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And so got it in this two-tone, black and gray plaid. And so it's a lot of stuff.
Don't
like
skip
that.
Those treads. Show us those treads over there. What's that?
Those?
What's that?
Oh, those are just the penny loafer version of my two-tone nubucks.
Those look stylish.
Oh, you like those? Hold on, wait.
See what I started? I was like, I got it.
I know, right? I don't know if I'm gonna bring these. They're fun to wear, but it's also that whole like, how much do I really feel like lugging around?
Yeah.
And so last time I went to Viva, I wasn't able to go last year because I was in the process of moving. But same company, it's called Remix Vintage, that does those shoes.
Oh my gosh, they'll go with the leopard stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about right there.
I can see you there.
But it's stuff like that, and bowling shirt type stuff, and there's a lot of that in there. I have this one's actually really cool, really swanky.
Jason, you've heard the what's going on here? Where's you've seen that meme? You remember the white patent loafer, or the patent loafers from back in the 70s? They had the white ones with little tassel on them.
Right, yeah.
And so it's a picture of those, and it says, if your dad wore these, you have siblings you don't know.
Don't know about, right, yeah. This one is super cool. This is a vintage piece. I scored this. I scored this for way cheaper than I would have expected. It was made in 1959. It is a cream silk dinner jacket, Shaw collar. It is in perfect condition. It still has the manufacturer's tags in there and stuff like that. If I dig further into the pockets, you'd be able to see all of the manufacturer's date, pattern numbers, all that stuff. Some more camp collar style shirts, which was, kind of more of a 40s thing, but it carried over into the 50s. I've got this 40s leisure jacket, as they would have called it. So it's a lot of stuff like that. I've got my different, interesting patterned, wool sport coats.
Dude, you have a vintage collection, and I will simply recall the conversation that we last had, where we got the tour of all of the vintage appliances, memorabilia, paraphernalia. That I had asked you the question.
Yeah,
you are clearly into collecting vintage things, and is the reason for it because you're trying to attract a vintage woman?
I think that's more of like a fragmentary pattern kind of thing off of that. I honestly just do it because I love it.
Well, I'm saying, don't you think a vintage woman would appreciate your vintageness?
Are you talking a vintage woman like she's actually vintage, or into the vintage?
Into the vintage. Like she likes doing West Coast swing, like, and things like
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah. Like, no, like all of that stuff would be awesome. Like, I would love to have
Yeah.
that in a partner. Like, so it's more of like when so like I say, it's like a fragment, it's like a frag pattern. Like
Yeah.
I have this thing that I love. If I find somebody who is into all of this, it makes life exponentially easier because, hey, how do we want to decorate the bedroom? Let's go to the antique store, right? Like, stuff like that. Let's see some other cool things. So, Brownie Hawkeye camera.
Oh my.
So it's complete in the sales box with the
Nice.
flash and with flash bulbs.
Holy
I have
Is
my
that the cube? That's not the cube.
what that?
The flash. Yeah. Is that the remember the cube?
It looks just like that.
Oh,
and
I
there's
see.
a flash
Yeah, no,
bulb that
that's
goes
right.
in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then my grandma and like my appreciation for antiques and stuff like that really comes from my grandmother on my mom's side of the family and my mom, because like I got drugged around going to antique stores all the time as a kid, so it just like worked its way into the DNA. But so I have this pleasure chest cooler that I keep up in here. She got me that.
Wait a minute. It's called Pleasure Chest.
I know
Yeah.
Just let it go.
Right. Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
even start with you.
No, I just
No, sure you could. You
never
probably
heard of that one. I missed that one.
And then I've got my vintage
well, ball glove, baseball.
ball glove.
Nice.
And then I have another one of these coolers that's a 7-Up one. It's all white, has 7-Up on the side. It's kind of buried away right now. And my place is an absolute wreck. I've been totally ignoring doing the adulting things just because busy.
Well, it kind of reminds me of what you would imagine Captain America would do.
On his day off.
On his day off, he would just go collect all the stuff from
his era.
That's
right. So like I found there we go. This vintage and please just ignore the stuff on the top, but it's a
veneer.
Not just the mirror, but the dresser as well. They came as a set. It's a Broyhill emphasis was the model line.
That's what I had.
Look like my
it's from the early 60s. So like I actually got that not too long after moving in here because I needed a real dresser. And so it's little things like that. And then so since the professor brought it up, wrong switch. We'll go into my horrible, filthy hat making area.
Hey, the hat. I just saw hats. Okay.
Oh, what do you see what this guy does? He's a master.
Okay.
Incredible work.
So this is a Stetson.
Right.
They had a line called Royal Stetson. I'm assuming they were a little higher quality or whatever, but this one was made in the 40s. And I picked it up on eBay. Yeah, eBay. For like $40-$50, right? May have been less than that. It was missing a hat band and everything, and it was all beat up. And so I reblocked it. I disassembled it, like the sweatband, the leather sweatband was all dry rotted away and stuff. I reblocked it, made a new hat band for it out of vintage grosgrain ribbon, made a new sweatband for it, put all the tags back into it and everything like that. This is another one that I got from a hatter out in California called Barron's, where they had like an indie hat, but the blocking wasn't quite right on the crown. And so I ended up reblocking that. The grosgrain ribbon they had used was kind of a similar, but like slightly darker, maybe a little ruddier, sable kind of color, dark, but it was like a darker brown, and that had all faded out. And so I went back in with the vintage grosgrain, made a new hat band for it after blocking everything out and all that. This is one I built.
Oh, geez, those are nice.
Thank you.
They're phenomenal.
Let's see where. Where did I?
I can't
Where
get
did
over
I
how
put one?
intensive it is, like how labor it is. I actually watched a show on it, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, where they actually were bringing them in, putting the
Yeah.
sizing the way it, with all the little,
Oh
whatever,
yeah.
little things. I was
And
like,
and I don't have a conformator and a 4 million to like put on somebody's head and actually get everything dialed in. So I have to go off of basic sizes. Like to get a vintage conformator, like you're not going to find one for under $3,500. There's people that 3D print them.
yep,
Um,
I know that.
I just recently started looking back into the 3D printed ones, and I've seen price come way down because there were still people who were like, "Oh yeah, 3D printed conformator, $800," and I'm like, "No, that's got to be like $10 of PLA filament. I'm not even gonna come close to spending what you're asking for it." But so like as more of those things start popping up, I'm starting to look more and more into getting those. Like
Yeah.
the conformator is what you actually put on the head and then, adjust everything so you get the head shape. And then the 4 million goes on top of that. And that actually creates like the inner diameter of the hat. So you would take the hat and the hat band and everything and put that on the 4 million to get that shape and size dialed in. So this is one of the first hats that I made for someone else. The first hat I made for someone was a coworker back at Grand Forks when I was living up in North Dakota. And then I built this hat, which is like, a Raiders clone. I built this hat for a kid named Ryan in Tennessee. And he contacted me about a month ago and was like, "Hey, so is there a way to like, can I order one of those block things that you use to like shape the felt and stuff?" I'm like, "Well, what's going on? Something get damaged, whatever." And he's like, "I've gained a bunch of weight since going to college."
Yeah,
and my hat doesn't fit.
became a fathead.
Well, he didn't become a fat head. He just, he was 18 when I built the hat for him, and he's living at home and now he's out, so, he's put on some extra weight. But like a little weight increases can impact the sizing of your hat. And so he sent it to me to reblock and resize.
Yep.
And I was like, "Yeah, send it to me, and I'll do up a new sweatband, and I can reblock the hat body." And so I have that sitting on the side, but I actually started. I got kind of messing with this, and I'm like, the felt on this is really thin because it's a dress weight felt, and like I'm afraid of trying to block it up a size or two sizes. Actually, is what I think it would be. And I'm worried about overstressing the felt. So I had an extra hat blank, like the hat body, the cape line as they call it, in the same color. And so like I currently have it on a block right now and have been slowly working on it. I made him the new sweatband. I'll tool in his initials and last name, the year it was made. I'll put in a little thing for Marauder Hat Company, which is what I do my stuff under. And little things like that. My latest one. So I grew up watching all the old John Wayne movies, right? Like I was raised
Duke
on John Ford's, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Ford Apache, all that stuff. And so I had been watching them lately, and I had ordered a new felt material. So most of your better hats, your lower grade hats are made out of wool felt. I hate working with wool felt. I can't get it to shape right. It takes way too much work. It smells horrible when you're working with it because it smells like a wet sheep, right? And so working with rabbit fur felt or beaver fur felt, or the other one that isn't quite as popular, but I think it's more because it's less known, not so much that it's a poor quality thing to work with, is Koipu.
What?
So Koipu, which most people, if they know the animal that you're talking about, most people here in the States, especially places like Louisiana, nutria. And so like it's a cousin to the beaver, right? So it's an aquatic mammal, like, and it's a swamp rat.
Yeah.
And so there's a company out there that sells Koipu hat bodies.
Swamp rat.
Right, sells swamp rat hat bodies.
Swamp rat pelt.
Oh, right. Yeah, so I ordered a couple, just like, you know what, let me work with this, see, because it's cheaper than beaver. So if I go for like really high quality beaver just for the hat body, okay, if you were going to go out on the market and go buy a beaver fur hat, right? A beaver fur felt hat, fedora, pork pie, a cowboy hat, whatever, right? Um, and you get like, and everybody kind of has a slightly different numbering system for the quality, but like, some people are like, ooh, 50x or ooh, 500x or 100x, right? But like one where it's 100% beaver and not a blend, right? Um, just for the
It's an inside joke. Sorry.
got it. But just for the hat body itself is like $180 and higher, right? So it's really expensive. And so it's expensive for me, right? Not just person I'm making a hat for, but it's expensive for me too. And
always expensive.
there is that. But so I got some koi poo hat bodies in, and I got one in kind of a silver belly color, and so I made.
Gosh,
Wait a minute, I got to get full screen on that bad boy. Hold on.
this is going to go to my friends in the forces in Louisiana, by the way. You just do that up so I can talk like properly to those people.
Right. But so I went with the hat band, but I also sourced a campaign hat cord. So like if you look at like Civil War cavalry hats and all the cavalry movies and stuff, all their all their hats have the hat cord. Well, like what most people don't realize is the hat cord denotes something, right? So officers, it would be a gold hat cord. And there'd be like black accents. General officers would have gold, but it'd be like much heavier on black accents and things like that. And then you had, field officers, line officers, and then you go down into your branches. So like infantry has its own color. It's a light blue. Artillery has its own color. The ordnance guys have its own color, right? And so for that hat, well, I was like, this hat needs a hat cord because it's not going to be a proper like John Wayne Wild West working with the cavalry hat without a hat cord on it. So I got digging around and I got looking up hat cords and looking at the different colors and the style and whatnot, and trying to look for people who made reproductions. And so I find this chart that has a breakdown of all the hat cord colors that were used from like the 1870s all the way up to like 1916. And in there was one for field clerk. And so me being a history nut and me being a former Army warrant officer, the Army warrant officer traces its history and lineage back to the Army field clerk. And so I was like, oh, let me see if there's somebody that makes a reproduction of the field clerk hat cord. Couldn't find anybody that made a reproduction of it. But what I did find, ad for an eBay listing pops up, an original 1916 field clerk hat cord pops up for $10. So I was like, max bid $20, walked away from it. 2 days later, hey, you won. And I was like, yes. So now I have 100-plus-year-old Army field clerk hat cord on my John Wayne hat.
That's
and
awesome.
So it's like, I get to tie in not only military history in general, because it goes back to World War I, but I also get to tie in my career track, being a warrant officer. I get to tie that history into it. So I get to nerd out on it.
And you're heroes, that's kind of cool.
That is way cool and totally worth the nerd. Okay.
I am glad that you think it's way cool and totally worth the nerd, because like I know when I get excited about it and I've like told like friends like, yeah, there's been a couple of days I've worn it to work or whatever, and be like, hey, I like that hat. And be like, yeah, okay, so get this, right? And like I tell the story and like you don't see them, you don't see the eyes glaze over, but they're like, Jason's going on a history tale. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
like
yeah. I get that all the time.
I think 3 times now in the smoke pit at work, I go down, take a break, go down, have a cigarette or something, and I jackjaw with, some of the airmen, that go out there and some of the other civilian employees. And there's this one NCO, and he's like, Jason, man, I tell you what, It's like the amount of shit, whether I asked for it or didn't ask for it, didn't even know it was a thing, history related, that I have learned since we have started talking at the smoke pit is insane. And you always have something. It's like,
Well, I mean,
but it's always the usual group. It's always suspects too that are down there, and we're all pretty convinced that we are all ADHD children. So we tend to glom together in a pack.
Well, when you get to the point where you have the intensity
mm-hmm.
of the resonance that you feel with that,
and
you put your energy towards it, and
mm-hmm.
you continually reinforce that frequency that you're resonating with, and you're going, I want some more of that. I want some more of that. I want some more of that.
Oh yeah.
And that's how it all works that way. But when it
it definitely does.
when it expresses itself in an authentic and well done way, it's
mm-hmm.
even more enjoyable. And I have to say that your little tour tonight of everything that you've been doing has not only been extremely awesome and authentic, but it's an example of having that intention and that intensity to go after it and to really appreciate it. I mean, there are a lot of people get into things and they do them half-ass, or
right.
It's a casual, energetic expression that they go explore.
Yeah.
But
well, and I'll be completely honest on that particular point. Being an ADHD child, that happens a lot with me. And it's not because like suddenly I don't like it. It's just because suddenly like the dopamine hit that's going on in my brain isn't dopamine hitting quite as much. And so there's tons of like, half started projects where it's like, I've got to wait until the energy comes back around. Like I've got to walk away from it long enough that when I walk back to it, it all kicks back in. But like certain things just keep hitting, and like historical stuff is one of them. And it's
Karen, do you think would you diagnose Jason as having ADHD or some kind of symptom like that?
No, but doing quantum medicine and holistic, now that I've left all the allopathic nursing stuff, they don't know what the hell they're talking about anyway. So, I find people are just dialed into what they like and where their focus is. Why does that have to be in a deficit for something else, right? And everything I found, every psychiatric mental condition has always been a nutrient deficient. It's a certain zinc or a mineral, or it's a combination of too much candida yeast fungus, called parasites, call it whatever you want. They don't know what the hell they're doing. And it's funny that you're talking about hats today, because I was on with Ryan Velli. And of course, he's American National Guard and all our AI at ryanvelli.com, whistleblower.
Mm-hmm.
So it's brought in today. And then they had another one that was on Hugo Victor, which is Curtis Griffin, who again is a very disgruntled ex-Canadian infantry guy in his 30s, right? And he's been studying Mark Pacho. But anyway, we got into symbolism, occult stuff, and he started talking. He goes, look at what they did to us. He said, look how we wore our berets. Look at the crown and look what they did. They put it right over our third eye. It's like he started talking about the circles and the sigils and stuff, and really got into the cult stuff. We were down a rabbit hole today, in that room. But he said, look how that is. But, it's funny when you're talking about how they do things, how they form it, what they were doing. This is what we wore for our, brigade and stuff like that. It was interesting.
The intentionality.
And that's one of those things. So like coming over from the Army, being an old Army guy and going to work for the Air Force, right? Yeah. Like it's interesting. There are some things that the Army and like the Marine Corps, when it comes to heritage, lineage, history, of not just the branch of service, but down to the units and things like that, that those branches do incredibly well. The Air Force doesn't do as well in the same ways that they do. They do really well in different stuff. Like, so the Army, I can't speak for like Marine Corps and Navy, but like the Army doesn't have a historian at the battalion level, getting the history of all the different companies under the battalion and then funneling that up. the Air Force, every wing is supposed to have a historian. Now, not all the billets are filled, but like every wing has one of that. So they're capturing all of that data, and the annual history and the collection and the writing of documents and the writing of the annual history, like in the Army, ends up being a secondary duty, right? So you get some poor lieutenant or some poor senior NCO that's like, hey, oh yeah, by the way, you've got this additional duty of writing the unit's history for the year. And so you don't have like a hyper focus where you have people that are going and hunting documents, trying to find all these things. Like, so at the Cyberspace Capability Center, our history as an official actual unit and organization goes all the way back to 1943. But you can trace it back to 1938, right, when they initially set up they gave the yay verily for creating the Army Airways Communication System. And so, in 43, we become an actual organization. We have units that are assigned under us. We have this very particular mission set that we're doing and all of that. And then it transfers over to the Air Force when the Air Force leaves the Army in 47. And I have literal original copies of the annual histories going back to 1938 in my office that I can grab off of my shelf, that some historian clacked it out on his typewriter and bound it all together, right? Like, I never saw anything like that in the Army. It was always at a higher echelon, and they would pull from a whole bunch of units, and then they would sit there and try to, do studies and try to collect things and write histories. And so we get down into the weeds in the Air Force with it. So we're collecting all the stuff, but I don't think the Air Force is as good at instilling the cultural aspects of the heritage into the units as the Army does, as the Marine Corps does. Like, I can sit there, I could sit here and I can just say, the first actual like unit I was assigned to, not like being training, in training, but like, well, okay, technically I was still in training, but I was assigned to that unit. Is Bravo Company, first of the 145th Aviation Regiment. First with guns was our motto, right? Because we were the first outfit that put weapons on helicopters going into Vietnam, right? Like, and that's a big point of pride. We were the first regiment to do that. And, that sort of thing is taught, right, to the people. You learn about your unit's lineage and where they came from. When I go on to when after I got out of training stuff and I go off to my regular line units, right? Bravo Company, 10th Brigade Support Battalion. The 10th Brigade Support Battalion started in World War II when the 10th Mountain Division was formed in 42. They're building all of the units that go into that, like
Jason,
all that stuff.
Aren't you describing a culture, though? It's a different culture, right?
It is. It's a different culture. And it's interesting, though, because so like with the Air Force was born out of the Army, right? Mm-hmm. 1947, they're like, okay, we are taking the Army Air Corps Air Forces. We're taking that entity and we are standing up a branch of military service, right?
Right.
And so, they carry with it a little bit of that Army culture, but I kind of feel like, and maybe it's just the units that I've been to, like I've talked to people who are like fighter squad, like fighter wings and stuff like that. And you get down in the squadrons and like those outfits, the actual flying units that fly aircraft, run mission all the time, stuff like that. Those guys are a little more steeped in it. Right. But like where I'm at, it's not as steep.
So basically I asked you when we were talking earlier about the differences, because we were going through the things that you have to go through with the DoD, the difference between the Army and
Mm-hmm.
the Air Force. And I'd asked you, what the most patriotic service of the armed forces was.
Right. Yeah.
And it was of course the Air Force, because they are USAF. Karen's
I would say
that one.
Well, and I would say, like, when you look at something like that informationally and
Yeah.
what we gather and collect and produce, probably accurate, or close to accurate, right? The Army, though, and like the Marine Corps, they instill that information into their people,
Yeah.
right? Like that becomes a part of who you are and your identity, and it's something to rally behind. You know, when the chips are down, you can sit there and be like, you know what, man, I'm having a really tough time doing this, or I'm having a really hard time out here in the field, whatever it is, and be like, you know, what would those guys that were sitting there in the Italian Alps on Riva Ridge trying to rout the German Wehrmacht out of the mountains and the Fallschirmjäger out of the mountains, you know, in 44, like, what would they say about how I'm feeling right now? Like, you know, like you have something where
Yeah.
it's a bit more recognizable, I guess you can, or instinctual, or it's ingrained in there in a way that, like, you understand you're standing on the shoulders of giants. There has been a foundation laid that is solid and firm.
There
So
seems to
You
be
are
really
there a lot of
acute.
women? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Karen.
I was gonna say, are there actually quite a few women like in your area right now? Like, I mean, I know we talked about the patriarchal and I got that part, but what have you seen as the difference with the involvement of the women? Or is there a lot even in your particular area?
um there's a number of women in there. The majority of them, I think, are civilian employees of the cyberspace capability center. But we have a number of women airmen, you know, through the ranks, you know, going from, you know, more senior airmen through the NCO ranks and into the officer ranks. Um, you know, it's probably a little bit more. Well, I think until you start getting into stuff like, you know, the infantry and things like that, you know, it probably looks like a pretty good cross section of just like how people are geared in society in general. You know, like just what you gravitate towards. You know,
Mhm.
men tend to go more towards military stuff, physical labor, all those things. You know, if you want to look at like traditional gender roles, but like I'd say it's pretty good representation of the percentage of women you'd find in these different career fields. Versus men. It's not. There's a number there, you know, but like that's the other thing too. Like, so one of the things the military's done for me is like I recognize that there's women in the ranks, but like I don't look at it as like, oh, it's a girl in the ranks. It's like, nah, dude, that's another green suitor. And if I got to get them to lay down some hate with the 240 Bravo while we're doing something, by God, they're going to do it. Like I have the faith and confidence for them to do that.
Mhm.
Like I just see them as they're another soldier. They're another airman. You know, the fact that they're a woman is a secondary trait. Um, First and foremost, they're someone wearing the uniform, and that's how I view everything. Like I don't even look at it like, you know, on race levels, like, you know, black guy,
Well,
Hispanic guy, Asian dude, whatever. It's like, nah, man, we're all green suiters and we all bleed red, white, and blue.
yeah, and isn't that kind of a cultural thing? I mean, from the standpoint, particularly as it relates to the American armed forces and the Americanism, and back to the, you know, the question of, you know, which branch is the most patriotic, and that being the U.S. because they AF.
Man,
So,
you're gonna get a lot of mileage out of that one.
well, I'm gonna wear it out because I can tell it's got a short life, so I'm just getting it over with.
Milk it for everything it's worth.
Just get it over with, so you know, knock it out. Um, but the point is that that attitude that you have about having some kind of affection, some affiliation, some attraction to this. It's about the uniform, it's about the service, it's about the role, it's about the stance and the attitude that you're putting into what those make up those things. So that
Well, yeah, you know,
you
and
that's
it's
what's most important.
And refreshing.
yeah. I mean, and like, you know, for me, I think one of the big things
Right.
for me was that, you know, the service aspect was huge for me. Um, and being a part of something that is much bigger than yourself and is a big thing. I think that impacts a lot of people, whether they realize it or not. I mean, you get a lot of vets who get out and they no longer have that. Like all of a sudden you've lost your culture. You've lost that thing, that much bigger thing, than you've lost your connection to that in a way. And I think that's rough for a lot of people, especially after 20 years at GWOT.
You belong to a group or a team that you are no longer associating with. You built that that camaraderie, that sense of, the self-organized collective of interest, right? And motivation.
Well, that's like one of those things too that, like, it's interesting seeing the different generations come in since I've come in and how they look at things, and a lot of the younger generation people, there is an attitude of, like, I don't think that some of the newer generations are raised in the same way with the same kinds of, concepts and perspectives that like mine was, and y'all's before me and stuff like that, where it's you go into the military and there's things that we can't do that regular civilians can do, right? And you willingly volunteer to set those things aside to serve a greater purpose. And understand that, what, as long as I'm wearing this uniform, as long as I'm in, whether I like it or not, I can't grow hair down to my ass, right? Like I have to maintain regs. I can't, go smoke pot. I can't, whatever.
Canada now, you can have a beard, you can have it any color, you can do almost anything. They've so G'd up this place. It's like unreal what they have done to desecrate the forces up here.
It's really, and that's the thing, is there's a lot of stuff that I don't think is desecration. I think I think some of it is like old timers and fuddy duddies like me. I count myself slightly among those ranks, the clean shaven army, right? We see these guys with beards and it's kind of like,
I'm talking neon blue. I have seen guys in uniform with neon blue looking like they're ZZ Top. So
we don't do any of that crap.
And earrings, hoop earrings. We had one Navy security division that was looking after, well, that's another story, but they did Kamloops, Kelowna, and then they're up here in Nelson. I thought this has got to be a psyop, right? So I phoned up the guys at like Stolen Valor, said, is this like correct? And they said, Karen, it's allowed now. And I'll show you what. And they did. They sent me what, and I said, this isn't even healthy if you did have to put a mask on. But aside from that, that's just
like in the American military, like we're not allowed to do that. Like if you dye your hair or something like that, it has to be a naturally occurring color for human beings. So like there's limits and bounds to it, but there's things that they've loosened up on. And like the current SecDef is trying to rein all that in, and there's still fight about beards and stuff like that because with modern gas mask technology and things like that and how they're made and the materials they're made out of, you can still get a good seal even with a beard. Now, if you're running around with like ZZ Top, you're not gonna, but that's why they have length restrictions, and if you look at the forces around the rest of the world, there's all kinds of dudes running around with beards. The German army's full of them.
Okay, so since you brought it up, let me toss this on the table and spin it around.
Okay.
The military works in its optimal configuration and execution because it is the most discriminating body of a group of people that exists.
Right. I mean, it's like, 1% or less that, serve. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff thrown out there that like, 75% of the current military aged males, or people in general probably aren't fit for service in their current condition. So if we did have a draft, shit.
Yeah, well, but what's interesting on that point is that it appears that the volunteer recruit numbers have skyrocketed.
Yeah.
people are like, okay, now I want to get in on and hang with these folks. Same
Yeah.
thing has happened at the FBI. The record number of applicants is like through the roof. It's like, well,
Yeah.
wait a minute. If it was so screwed up, or the people that were going to come in were going to screw it up even worse and really make it a problem, then why is everybody trying to jump on board with them? Why all of a sudden they're more popular than they were before?
Well,
But
and
my point of
I think a lot of that is owed to, there are some decisions that I agree with, some decisions I don't agree with. That's all personal opinion, conjecture kind of stuff. But at the root of it, current SecDef is trying to do things in a way that where we are focusing on being what we have been since World War II. I mean, and briefly in World War I, the world's premier fighting force.
Well, and that's
And
my point, and then that's why I brought it
yeah,
up, is that it's the most discriminating. There's more discrimination that goes on in the military than anywhere else. In a
yeah,
corporate, I mean, you get into tribals and everything else. That's a different model. But
yeah.
as a group of people that have been assembled to accomplish a certain thing,
Mhm.
the requirements for the standards that are set to be the most lethal, the
Yeah,
military is designed to break things and kill things. That's what
yeah,
it does. And it
yeah.
does it either in a defensive posture or an offensive one, but it's
Right.
designed to be lethal.
Yeah.
So if you say, all right, well, what does it take to be the most lethal? Well, you're
Mhm.
going to have a whole bunch of requirements and restrictions and limitations and
Yeah.
discriminations and everything else to get the best.
Hmm.
Um, the whole idea of even having to be in that posture is a whole nother rabbit hole because that's humanity's history. But
Right.
at
Yeah.
this point in time, given the way that the state of reality, that
Hmm.
is a part of the reality. So
Yeah.
if indeed being discriminatory seems to get you the best performance,
Hmm.
shouldn't you do that with everything?
To a point. You know what I mean? Like,
Do you see my point?
right.
I mean, why wouldn't being as discriminatory as possible be one of the most,
Discrimination, I would say, and I think the key point there in what you just said just now is as possible, right? Like, you know, it should not, like discrimination should stop at, are you able to do the job, right?
well, that's
Like,
all I'm saying.
yeah,
The
and that's
discrimination
where it
needs to
stops.
be, it needs to be limited to the requirements
Right.
for the optimal performance
Hmm.
of whatever it's going to be tasked to
Yeah.
execute. That's that's where discrimination has to start and stop, because you
Yeah.
don't,
It has
if
to
you
be that
have,
window.
if you and I think the problem with using that word is it's been weaponized. The
Yeah.
reality of what discrimination means, it means to discern, to
Hmm.
to analyze, to intuit,
Yeah.
to take whatever data is available and discriminate against the information to
Right.
determine its validity and its
Yeah.
usefulness and all that. So
Absolutely.
discrimination in discipline is what
Hmm.
you have to have in order for the discipline to be something you can be disciplined about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Eh,
And that's,
No?
you see a lot of, like, and I think there have been problems in messaging. Um,
How do you mean?
well, so, like, when they start going after the DEI stuff, right? And they're like, oh, you see the news reports, you see articles, you see posts on whatever, like, oh, they've gotten rid of this DEI stuff. This thing got deleted, right? And the most recent example, and it's not military, but it's the same kind of thing, was, the National Park Service took down a photo that was like a primary, like, upfront main photo on their website of Harriet Tubman and a quote from her. They had pulled that picture down and they'd put up another picture that was a combination of various, like, you know how we do like the tribute stamps, you have the Elvis stamp and you have the Betty White stamp and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was those kinds of things. And it was black and white abolitionists and people who were involved in the Underground Railroad and things like that. So you had Harriet Tubman up there, you had Frederick Douglass up there. You had the white folks who were, heavily involved in. I can't remember the names right now who all was up there. But that's what they put up. Right. And then so the only thing that you get, though, when you have the headline, when you have an article, until you get like, a paragraph and a half in, is that they took down Harriet Tubman's photo. And it's like, yes, they took down a photo of Harriet Tubman, but she was still up there on the main page, along with these other people. And the idea of doing that was trying to show that, like, hey, look, white people and black people have been working together towards the betterment of society and, eliminating things like racism, eliminating, obviously, in that time period, things like slavery. They have worked in concert together to make these things happen. Right. We're a team. We're in this together and all of that stuff. Now, media people get a hold of those things and they twist it around for the headlines and the clickbait and to get people riled up so they can get numbers and they can get views and all of these things. But like,
agitated have been activated.
Yes. And, you look at like, Hegseth put out thing where, and like, honestly, when he announced it, I'm like, okay, that probably would have been all right to keep in because that really didn't do anything, man. Like, I get what you're trying to do, but we could have left that alone. It was okay. But like the cultural heritage months, right? Black History Month, Pacific Islander months, those kinds of things, right? Showing, those kinds of things helped illustrate that, hey, we are a diverse force, and it cements the various pillars of e pluribus unum, out of many one, right? And so like, people want to have heroes to look to. It's like Ronald Reagan said when he gave his boys a point to Hawk speech, at the D-Day Memorial, I think is where he said it, where he said, people say today there are no heroes. Well, they just don't know where to look, right? People look for those heroes, those things in themselves to see, hey, this person's like me, right? And I think that's kind of a natural inclination of people in general, right? They want to see people similar to themselves doing these great things, and I understand that. And his intent was not to get rid of the fact or try to hide the fact that, we're a racially diverse force. His intent was to basically kind of what I, borrowing a phrase from earlier, is that we all bleed green, right? In the Army, we all bleed green because, green camouflage and all that stuff, right? It's like we are all one force. I think messaging probably could have been a little bit better in explaining why it was being done. But there's a lot of things where people are getting upset about the removal of stuff. And it's like, hold on, we're not erasing, this Marine Corps Medal of Honor winner who is an African-American. We're not erasing this from history. We're not deleting them from the history books or, the tales that are told. The guy is immortalized in, various, Medal of Honor monuments across the country. You have these people and figures that, the Air Force, during African-American History Month and stuff like that, because sometimes I'd get asked to like, hey, can we get a historical, vignette on somebody or whatever? So like the first African-American fighter ace actually didn't even fly for the U.S. He was in the Lafayette Escadrille flying for the French during World War I. After he had been a machine gunner in the infantry, and he got injured and he was recuperating, and then went up in an aircraft and then was like, hey, I can do this. I can be a machine gunner from the aircraft. And then he learned how to fly. And then, he got a bunch of aerial victories and he did a bunch of things. Like the Air Force, even though this was an African-American who flew in the French army, in the French military, holds this person in high regard. Like he's mentioned it in displays at the National Air Force Museum, right? So people like that they're not being deleted from history. They're deleting various training things where it's like, if you look at all of the extra training that the military has to go through, that isn't even related to what they specifically do in their career field within the military, it's insane. Right? Like there's so much stuff and it's all training that's repeated every year, right? Because you have to stay current on your cybersecurity stuff or your insider threat things and anti-terrorism things and all these different things. And you have all these courses and classes that you either have to sit through or you got to sit at your computer and, spend a couple of hours doing over the course of the week. You have these things like that where we're now taking training time away. We're taking time away from mechanics being in the motor pool, making sure all of our pacing items are up and running and fully mission capable.
Way to throw some good AI at that. Right?
I mean, sneak that in, right?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
I saw a moment, I slipped it in.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's like, but the messaging wasn't done well and it wasn't done strongly enough, loudly enough to drown out the people who want to create, clickbait and get people agitated to get views and to get ratings on TV.
See, that whole clickbait thing, I mean, it's been highly effective.
It has. It has. We all fall for it. It's like a little dopamine hit.
I think just like all this other bullshit that's getting exposed, I think what's happened is it's been so effective that it's out-affected itself.
I think people are recognizing it more.
The awareness of it, the amount that people have seen of it, and it's only clever until it becomes exposed, right? So you after a while.
Well, like I can't tell you how many times I've seen a post or a thread on like Facebook where somebody posts something and then like 6 comments in, it's like, you didn't even get past the headline, did you? Like it doesn't even say anything about that in here. It like people recognize it. It's one of those things you'll see somebody go in and they're like, so here's what the article actually says, and I'm like, not all heroes wear capes.
Well, and that's another thing, just as far as using discrimination, back to that use of that word, with the data feed that you have, the available information in the event stream as it continuously unfolds is just ginormous and always more and getting bigger and apparently accelerating. So being able to sift through and filter through the stuff that's available is becoming kind of an art. But one of the key things that's happening, from my perspective, is what's happening is credibility has more value and weight to the content of whatever it is you're consuming now than ever before. Because the amount of shit that has been discredited used to be stuff that had credit and was given, a credible authority. It is all basically dismantled itself to the point where it's so obvious the difference between what is credible and what isn't, that it's going to be an easier and clearly a better way forward for everybody to be able to sort through the tsunami of information and new and novelty that's unfolding in front of us.
All the stuff that this is really achieving, other than getting clicks and views for people so they can keep their counters up and keep their ratings and keep their sponsorships and whatever, like one of the things that all this stuff is really, really doing that really disturbs me is how polarizing it is. And it is polarizing people I know that are like have not been very polarized people in general. I have a friend of mine who like gets upset about all kinds of things, and I'm like, okay, but what about this side of things? Like, And I kind of feel like here lately for the last few months, like that's been my sole purpose in terms of, interactions with this one friend of mine. And a man I very, very much respect, think very highly of. He was my first company commander in the Army. And, I would follow that guy into hell and back, even still, because I know the fiber of his character, right? And so it's like, one of those things where you're just like, dude, hey, what about this? And we'll go back and forth about stuff. But like, you get people who are upset about things so much and polarized so much where like they can't even recognize where there's a win on something. So like with all of the base renamings, right? They're talking about renaming all the bases that got renamed under Biden.
Thule. Yeah, Thule just got renamed in Greenland to like Pacific because it sounds more Greenlandish. I'm like, what? Fort Bliss, all that. Fort Bragg.
Right. And there are certain things where it's like I absolutely understand why we renamed them. I support it, fully in terms of like, what, hey, these were, Confederate generals. Not all of them were the best generals, but that was a very, very troubling period in our time. The reason why those camps, which then later became bases, were named after those generals was to help with reunification of the nation and healing, because the Southern pride thing was still strong, and things like that. And so it was a way to get people to be more, amicable to having, camps and bases and stuff like that set up. And
well, if you apply that model to all of history and the rest of the civilizations that we've uncovered and decoded and deciphered and semi-understood, that was just common stuff.
Right.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah. But like the funny thing though is like, so I'll use Fort Bragg, right? Fort Bragg is an example. Fort Bragg, home of the 82nd Airborne, home of Special Operations, like all that stuff, right? The JFK Special Warfare Center, I believe it's there. But it has all of these associations with things, and it's always been Bragg, and everybody, especially in those communities, are like, it's Bragg. It's always been Bragg, right? That's how they know it. That's how they remember it. That's in the fabric of their being. And, they renamed it to Fort Liberty, which everybody was like, that's really kind of lame. They had another name picked out, and there a few other picked out. And because you had like special warfare there and you had the airborne there, which are really big elements and, heavy hitting elements about stuff, like we have these competing personalities, if you will. It's like, we'll just call it Liberty. And, that way we're not choosing favorites.
So they just renamed it back to Bragg. I haven't heard.
They just recently renamed it back to Bragg. And so what Hegseth did is he went back through the list of names, right? Because they submitted all kinds of lists of names for every installation that they could, rename this stuff to, right? And there was a PFC Roland Bragg, World War II veteran. He was an airborne guy. He wasn't 82nd Airborne. He was 17th Airborne, but he was at the Battle of the Bulge. He fought at Bastogne. He earned the Silver Star. He has that deep connection to the airborne because he was an airborne guy, and he fought in our biggest war, and all that stuff. And it's like, here we go. We can name the base back to Bragg. We found somebody who is not something that where people can go like, I don't know, well, we have them all named after traitors. It's like, there we go. We've got an American hero, a Silver Star winner. He was an airborne guy, same last name as Braxton Bragg, but it's not Braxton Bragg. It's Roland Bragg. We can now have Bragg be Bragg again. So now you're making all the airborne people happy. You're making all the anti-racism people happy. And then you got these groups of people in between, right? And a lot of them are like old-timey fuddy-duddy dudes who are like, well, some PFC who wasn't even associated with the 82nd Airborne, they never should have, why they do that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, man, you got your base named back to Bragg, all right? And hey, dude, you got your base no longer named after a traitor, as you see it, all right? So can we just take the win? Can we just take the win? Can we do that? But they're so polarized.
Do you think that when people get worked up like that there's something else going on?
Oh yeah, there usually is, and it becomes an outlet. You know what I mean? That's the thing that they can focus on that takes their mind off of whatever. Yeah, I think that happens a lot. I will say, because I went into the Army to be a helicopter pilot. I got medically grounded in the course, so I couldn't fly anymore. But like that's what I wanted to be, and like the home of all the warrant, like the home of warrant officer school and everything, is all at what was called Fort Rucker. Fort Rucker, Alabama. It's down the Wiregrass. It's in the upper corner of Lower Alabama, UCLA as they call it. And they renamed Rucker, who was named after a Confederate colonel or general who really did nothing of major import during the Civil War and actually had much bigger impact on the economy and things like that because he was an industrialist following the Civil War. So there's probably a little bit more politics involved in that one. But they named it after this guy Rucker. And so they're looking to who can we name it after? Well, they renamed Fort Rucker to Fort Novosel. They named it after a Vietnam era helicopter pilot, Mike Novosel. He retired from the Army as a CW-5, if I remember correctly. He actually passed away while I was at Fort Rucker between 2004 and 2007. He was a Medal of Honor recipient. He flew over 5,000 missions in Vietnam, rescued over 2,000 or 3,000 people in Vietnam. His son was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and that's really funny because one time his son got shot down. He went and extracted his son and his crew. And then another time, Chief Novosel got shot down, and his son extracted him and his crew. So it's one of those kind of weird stories like that. But before he became a helicopter pilot in the Army, he had been a B-29 pilot in World War II in the Army Air Forces, transferred over to, went over with the Air Force when the Air Force separated. And, this guy was like, Vietnam was starting to heat up, and he was like, look, I have all this experience running bombing missions. I have experience with leadership in the aircraft, all this stuff. Like, I want to go do my part. And the Air Force told him, well, we really don't have any positions for lieutenant colonels of your age over there in Vietnam. So the guy resigned his commission and became a warrant officer in the Army. So like he dropped way down on the rank scale from lieutenant colonel to go fly medevac for the Army in Hueys and go to Vietnam and do that. And that's, all that stuff is part of what got him the Medal of Honor and all of his actions over there. So you want to talk about like a fitting person to rename the home of Army aviation and the home of the Army warrant officer after. Mike Novosel is like the perfect person to put in there. So if Hegseth decides we're going to change Novosel back to Rucker, I may send him a professional and polite, strongly worded letter, advising against it. He's not going to listen to me, but I'm also very biased in that. But it's one of those things. It's like, that's like super fitting. Like,
it's a great story though. Like, yeah. But you look at liberty, and I mean, this is just another legal versus law word, but what did the Roman army used to do with women? Was to take liberty. That's why they got shore leave and liberty leave, right? Roman army would not penalty. You could rape, pillage, do whatever you wanted to women for that day, just like the Valentine's Day shit. So, when he said he was going to have like Liberty Day, I'm like, get serious. Like, what's the like? People actually know some of this stuff, and it gets insulting. But I was just looking at the Thule base, and then you had the Thule Society, and I'm like, now what the hell are they doing? And then they let go. I don't know if you heard, but you probably did. I mean, they let go of one of the commanders, like Susan Myers, out of that Air Force den. What? Because like Vance, that's huge. I read that, and I'm like,
it is huge in a way, but I can tell you right here and now, and this is speaking as a former officer, warrant officer, but still former officer, and professional warfighter. All right. One of the biggest things that we absolutely always try to maintain as much as humanly possible, obviously sometimes lines get blurred and things like that, but is we are not political.
Exactly.
We are the razor's edge of putting warheads on foreheads, smashing and breaking things. This is what we do when we are going to be the most professional at it. We understand that there is a political aspect to the military because, you know, military actions happen when politics and diplomacy fail, right? And so every officer, certainly every officer, you know, every non-com, you know, every enlisted person should strive to be as apolitical in the conduct of their duties as is absolutely humanly possible. And quite frankly, and I know there's going to be a lot of people out there who disagree with me on this, she crossed a line. She crossed a line of professionalism. Now, I understand why she did it, right? And that's not to say that I don't necessarily support her trying to say, hey, look, they came out here, they've said some stuff. I know better of you guys. The people know better of you guys, and things like that. But like, there's a manner in which you go about doing those things, right? There's a right way to do something and a wrong way to do something. And she crossed a line. And that's more of an etiquette and professionalism kind of thing. And trying to adhere to being as apolitical as possible. You know, I understand why she did it. Like I said, I don't necessarily disagree with the sentiment. I disagree with the methodology. Mm-hmm. We are not supposed to be political. Like I didn't even discuss my political views while I was in uniform. I didn't do it. I'm not going to do it. Why? Because I'm the tip of the spear. I'm not here to talk politics. I'm here to smash and break things and keep bad people from doing bad things to other people.
So what if the politics, though, create a situation where you have to go smash it and break it?
Well, but that's what happens. Like I said, you know, earlier, is that, you know, military actions happen when politics and diplomacy fails.
Yeah, what I'm saying is the politics is the enemy. The politics is where you got to take the tip of the sword, this spear, and you've got to go stick it up politics' ass all the way to where they can taste it.
And like, I understand kind of, I think I understand kind of what you're getting at, but like, that's the thing is we're not supposed to be used as a political tool, certainly not as a political tool.
Well, not supposed to be used and actually being used are two different things.
Right. But then that's also why within the confines of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and things like that, you know, the military personnel are imbued with the power to disobey unlawful orders. Right. We have rules that guide what kind of actions we can take and what kind of posturing we can do when we are stateside. Right. Like, that's why, you know, with all the stuff that was going down on the border, right, and you had all kinds of National Guard units that were going down there. You didn't have any until there was a state of emergency declared. Active duty units and reserve, because reserve is you know, different than National Guard. National Guard is a reserve force, but it is not federal. It's state, right? And then they are federally activated under Title 10 of the United States Code. Yeah. All of when you hear about military folks down on the border at Texas, up until Trump did the state of emergency thing, right? Right. All of those were National Guard units. They were not mobilized through federal orders, through Title 10, you know, that through orders that were backed by Title 10, where they became federalized. Those were governors saying, okay, we're going to activate this many people out of the National Guard. We're going to send them down to do duty, supporting these efforts down at the border. So like all of those guys, and I know that I know this particular part because a very, very good friend of mine was in the Texas National Guard. And he got sent down there for like 6 months to the border, supporting activities there. And none of that time, well, okay, I'm not gonna say none of that time, but it is a very, very, very minuscule portion of that time on activation, again, by the governor, not by the federal government, counts towards service time for retirement, right? Because that, the way they calculate service time, it goes into a little bit different math when you're activated under Title 10, so you're federalized. Now you're accruing time in service at the same rate as active duty does, right? But when you're not activated under Title 10, you don't accrue service time in the same way. You accrue it at a lower rate, is the best way I can put it. And none of the stuff that was related to the Soldier, Sailors, and Service Members Act applied to them because they weren't federalized. So like, hey, I got activated, you go into work, I got activated, I got to go down to the border. I'm going to be there for 6 months. Okay, well, hey, we really enjoyed having you work here. Your job might be here when you get back. It might not be, right? State activation doesn't have the same protections that federal activation does. So there's a lot. It's a much different kind of thing when you have all of those guys activated down there, and there's different rules for utilizing active duty and Federal Reserve personnel within states. Like we can do, you can take active duty guys and like we did with Katrina. You can send them for emergency and disaster relief operations and things like that. All those guys in Katrina that were rolling around with their primary weapons, they didn't have magazines. They didn't have ammo in magazines. They just had their rifle, so it looked kind of scary. They couldn't do anything with it. Like, that sort of things. There's all kinds of limitations. So to talk about the military having to be the tip of the spear against the very politics it is, there's checks and balances built within the system that either prevents that from happening or disallows some of those things from happening.
Except so if it's anarchy or tyranny.
Right. And even then they're going to have to be a state of emergency declared, and it has to go through that whole thing. And even
that's the thing about the military. I don't think that people, well, I think some people are aware of it, but they don't realize the fact that if it's external or internal threat, the military is designed to mitigate and eliminate. If it's within, right, and you have anarchy, then the military is going to be, this one is going to come in and clean it up. If it's tyranny, you have the military who's already at the head of that spear because the tyranny is being driven by the tyrants, right?
Well, right. And then that's why you have
the military has its own autonomous
government,
the direction that it wants to align itself with.
And like
that I mean, like, honestly,
what did Karen say?
No, I didn't get it.
Karen, your mic is down again.
Is it? I don't know what happened. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, now I can hear you.
No, I was just noticing, like, a lot of stuff like under military martial law, or when they federalized the National Guard, right? But it was for a set time for like a year, and a lot of people didn't realize about the continuity of government and stuff. I mean, when you start getting this whole thing, people actually think this is a political party and stuff like that, but yet they're acting as the commander in chief. I mean, I have a whole thing of, is this really like 4 years, 5 years, or is this 9? I mean, it's a bit of a joke when you start actually getting down that rabbit hole, that's backfiring in a lot of people's faces. But they don't realize the nuances that you're bringing forth, which is really, really important. you know?
Well, yeah, no, it is. And like that's one of those things like I've had conversations with another good friend of mine who's like, I worry about the military and they're just gonna like, they're gonna turn on us because they're just gonna go with the government. And it's like, well, okay, you know, one, and there's some very specific reasons why we do this. And when you swear in to the military, you swear an oath to the Constitution. You don't swear an oath to the president. You don't swear an oath to Congress. You don't swear an oath to SecDef. It is to the Constitution of the United States. You swear to protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. To the Constitution. It is not to a particular person or a particular governing body or a particular branch of government. Mm-hmm. Now, in that oath of office, for the enlisted, it says, I will follow the orders of, the officers appointed over me. And, non-commissioned officers and officers appointed over me. When you become an officer, whether it's a warrant officer or a commissioned officer, that oath changes slightly, and I will follow. Basically, it says I'll follow all the orders of the officers placed over me, and the president of the United States, right? Because for commissioned officers and warrant officers from the rank of CW2 through CW5, your authority is derived from the president of the United States. That's the signature on all the commissions, mm-hmm. right? As a warrant officer one, like for the Army, it's the Secretary of the Army. So it's that's kind of the difference between commissioning and warranting. Okay. But there's a bunch of laws, things changed that allowed CW2.
Which is also different than Ascension. Or
accessions.
What was that word?
Accession.
Accession, not ascension.
Yeah.
Okay. You won't be ascending when they do a session, let me tell you.
Right. But the first and foremost, it is an oath to the Constitution of the United States above all else, right? And that's why the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, and the various, laws and regulations and whatnot that govern the military have the ability to give commanders, the ability, and give even soldiers, the lowest level, the ability to disobey unlawful orders, right? If all of a sudden president's like, I'm creating kind of an extreme scenario just for illustrative purposes, right? If the president, was sitting there in DC and they've, state of emergency is declared and they've got, a whole, battalion parked around the White House and there's some protesters and the president says, open fire on those protesters, that commander has every right in the world to look POTUS in the eye and say, get bent. I'm not following that order. They're not doing anything. They haven't opened fire. They haven't, they're not throwing Molotov cocktails in the house. They're not trying to make like the British Army in, War of 1812 and raise the Capitol or raise the White House to the ground. They're out there picketing with signs. I'm not doing that. And if you don't like that answer, you could fire me and maybe you'll find somebody who will listen, but they probably won't.
So what about in the case of a coup?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the coup. So
like, are you talking like an actual, like a full on coup, not just like the, an internal coup
I'm
or
talking
political
Julius
Congress
Caesar kind of, take them
crossing
out.
the Rubicon?
Yeah.
Like you have a military commander out there who has somehow managed to rally, an entire division of troops to march on Washington to take them out.
Do you think
like that?
Yeah, that level. I mean, wouldn't that become? That seems to me that it would have to be under a continuity of government, like Karen was was mentioning earlier, where there would be, because when that happens,
Mhm.
complete command of everything transfers to a totally different dude who's sitting over here in NORAD.
Or wherever. I mean, like with something like that, you probably see a state of emergency declared, and you would
Martial
have
law.
units activated. Martial law could be it. And if you have an active war zone going on, or the active threat of a war zone going on, I mean, you could probably get away with enacting martial law.
Or an alien invasion.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
Stage
the
day
point is,
invasion.
the big takeaway is that there are systems and regulations and checks and balances in place to help prevent the scenarios where
Yes.
you have to have these arguments.
There are there are fail safes and triggers
Right.
and stuff
Yeah.
along the
And
way,
I'm and
but
I'm not a military lawyer. Like, I don't know all of the ins and outs and things, and things like that. So I can't tell you all of them. I could just tell you that there are fail safes and systems and checks and balances to try to curtail things like that, scenarios playing out like that as much as humanly possible. It's. I
well,
also think
the
there's too
question
many.
is,
I think there's too many leaders, and I think there's too many service members who understand that we swore an oath to the Constitution. And that means something. And
yeah, I
so,
think the real question is how many of these corrupt, nefarious, sketchy, shady folks, how many of them are there really? And how many are more along the lines of what you've talked about earlier tonight, Jason, that these people they're good people. They want to do well at their job. They want to do the job that they're doing
yeah,
well at. The
I
the
would I would
majority of
say,
people are in that category.
yeah, I would say
So
the vast majority are in that category. I think when you talk about the corruption stuff and things like that, it is and obviously, adjust for scale, right? A
yeah,
handful of people. It's a
right.
handful of bad apples in the bushel that gets everybody thinking that, like, oh, you work for the government, you're like a lazy loser dirtbag, and you don't do nothing.
That's
And
a
and I,
part of the weaponized narrative that keeps people from, trying to even have some kind of their own self-evaluation and analysis of, does this even make sense? What's going on here? Because as soon as you do that, you start seeing all this other shit that we were talking about, which is everything's broken. There's a bunch of
Mhm.
corrupt, crazy people that are sneaking around in the bush like snakes and have been doing it for
Yeah,
decades,
but
and they've created their own little holes of hidden
right,
treasure
but
and nonsense. But
those are the
it's like, hey,
outliers.
here come the floodlights.
Yeah,
Look what's going on, and now everybody can have a more organic view
yeah.
of the
I
reality
mean,
there. But
I honestly think that those are the exception to the rule. Those
which
kinds of people doing that stuff,
yeah,
right?
the shady
Radicals.
shits.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think those people are the exception to the rule.
yeah.
But a clean note, I think, when you look at, what Musk and his little team is doing there in the Doji Boys, but I mean, they're talking like, tackling off the Pentagon soon, right? And I
They're
mean,
talk about what?
cleaning the Pentagon. I hear another one that they're,
Oh, well, they've been going through DOD. Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, they're going through there and they're tackling these things, and maybe not so much will come public. But I mean, the other thing too is people going, where the hell are the? What do you mean you can't account for how many trillions was it? Nothing.
hmm
I
yeah,
mean, that stuff is going to be accountable too, right?
yeah. I think
And people think they're paying their salaries.
yeah, I think there's a lot of, like, where you see some really big problems. For instance, like, for me, is when you start looking at, I mean, there's a lot of things that USAID, USAID did that was good. There's a lot of, obviously, we found things that are like, what, um, but there's things like, and I think Trump put a stop to it, on this particular one. But, like, after we left Afghanistan in
Mm-hmm.
21, we were paying, basically, effectively paying the Taliban something, between 40 billion and 80 billion a week or something like that. Right. And it wasn't like we were like handing a satchel of money saying like, to the Taliban from USA. Right. It was all the various basically money laundering that was going on with NGOs, with non-government organizations.
Ukraine's is like the honeypot of all that bullshit.
Yes.
I mean,
and I think there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things where people don't realize that it's going on because they're just disconnected from things. They're focused in their own area of responsibility, their own projects. They have their own life things going on. It's something that they don't notice or even realize is going on. I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of stuff where it's like, well, we have these NGOs that are going to be helping to rebuild Afghanistan after 20 years of war. And they're going to be doing these things and helping people out.
Yeah.
Well, right. When it comes down to it, it's like, thanks for playing. But you start looking, because you start looking at the, it's an approved list of vendors that people can go get food from. And it's approved by the Taliban, and it's like all these people in here are all people who support whatever and have their hands in the pots of various things, related to the Taliban government. And, effectively the money gets laundered.
Oh, yeah.
And then just ends up in the Taliban's coffers, right? And
a whole bunch of sketchy assholes in between. That the intermediation of everything to get done, and particularly when it comes to just a money trail.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it is staggering, and it's only staggering because it's been able to, from my perspective, it's staggering that it's been so fucked up for so long that it is still working in spite of itself.
Yeah. Right. In a way, it's almost a testament to the system.
Really, I mean, this thing has got some cojones. It's hanging hard.
It is so broken, but it is still chugging along.
I know.
Like, man, this is like a good old fashioned radial piston engine in World War II, taking bullets and still getting back to the airfield.
It's like my first car, my '65 Ford Mustang. That thing, I drove it to where it was finally, before it gave up the ghost, it was only 6 of the 8 cylinders that were running, and it was still going down the road.
Right. But I think there's a lot of problems really when you see with the stuff like the NGO thing, which is like why it's good, why they went through USAID, and again, messaging, right? But I think like we were talking earlier, there's a certain element of not showing your hand, right? Because if the if the enemy can't see what it is, what they're doing, they don't know how you're going to hit them, right? So if there's a problem, you have the element of surprise, I guess. But it's like, so there were some things where it was handled very heavily and it wasn't messaged in a very plain, obvious way, where it's like, look, we're going into USAID. Here's the 15 things that we're looking for. Here's the criteria that we're using for determining whether something is a viable project for funding or not. Like, it's just like, we're going into USAID and like, we're finding all of it. Like that's how it's all hitting. Like, I think people do well with information. If they know what's going on, they're not like a bunch of dumb, panicky animals.
But come on, Jason, a lot of this pig squealing shit is only because the people that are squealing are the ones that are getting caught, number one. Number two, going back to one of my favorite philosophers from the 1960s, Granny on the Hillbillies, who said, them that's doing the accusing is usually the ones doing the doing.
And there's a lot of truth to that sort of stuff. But I mean, like, I think in terms of the population, in terms of, the people, not the people on the Hill and, the pundits and crap like that. You know what I mean? I mean, like, actual everyday run of the mill Joe Blow citizens.
See, I've got one for you. I got Mr. History Buff. Now I got something. Okay. So most people, when you're talking about swearing your allegiance, and I could discuss all what Barry North versus swearing is and the way it was done. Okay, the rituals to that, and that's a whole different thing on the Freemasons. But going back into the actual Constitution, most people do not realize there was an existing Constitution here before the military came in and started doing that when you get your founding fathers, which were really not the founding fathers. But aside from that, when you had peace treaties that were on this continent over Canada and the States and everything else for close to 900 years, and they were called the Five Nations and the Iroquois Confederacy, which was the original Constitution, this came in and actually usurped that. So now I have a question as to what the hell's going on when we bring in foreigners and actually make a foreign constitution to the original peoples that were on this land. So this becomes a thing when people don't even know this. Most people don't know about Manifest Destiny, they don't know about the simulation, and they don't know anything about the history, and that most people here, to this day, the majority of the people are still tribal and have no idea because they don't get, well, you would know because you got dog tags, but most people, when I ask them what nation they belong to, they come up with some country instead of, you know.
So I think the, and I think you kind of hit on it with that word assimilation, right? We're talking modern times because, like, look, I maybe I have an entirely too practical way of looking at things, right? Which I'm willing to accept. We're at now. All right. It's like Spaceballs, and they're watching Spaceballs, the movie, right? And it's like, well, can we go back to then? No, we can't. Well, why not? We just missed it, right? Like, we can't go back. We can't change that, right? You talk about your Manifest Destiny. You talk about the you know, the 5 civilized tribes, as people refer to it. But, you know, that whole region, you know, of the country where you had the confederation of the native tribes, you know, the Sequoia, right? Guys like that, you know, I can't do anything about that, man. Why? Because it's already happened. Now we can go forward and we can try to do things better from here, right? You know, but there's nothing I can do about that.
No, I hear you.
We can recognize it. We can do that, like, you know, but at some point,
wait a minute. What about this whole reparation thing? I mean, come on.
Shut up. Okay, somebody tries to get me to pay reparations. I'm going to have a problem, and I'll tell you why.
I'll tell you why. Calculate it.
I'll tell you about an Indian trust fund I know that's got 140 zeros behind it that's owed to us.
Everyone on my side of the family, or in my family, on mother's side and father's side, fought for the Union. All right, I have a great cousin who survived Andersonville, died walking home, right? Because it wasn't like you could Uber back to Kentucky or Ohio or wherever, right?
No.
Home Slice strapped on his leather personnel carriers and was walking. His Lambo Feeties, all right? He was walking from southern Georgia, Alabama border area back to, like, Ohio, right? Guy was walking, died because he gorged himself. He had been that starved at Andersonville, right? Kindly family takes him in, gives him some food. Dude eats himself to death. All right. I had family members who actively participated and ran stops on the Underground Railroad. I don't owe anybody shit. My family doesn't owe anybody shit. All right. Talk to somebody else from somewhere else below the Mason-Dixon. All right. I don't want anything to do with the conversation.
So what level of victimhood and reclassification of a whole host of categories do you have to get to in 2025? I mean, to me, if people bring up, you know, this race thing or even the bullshit with, I mean, the climate change nonsense. God damn, I have been fighting that shit for 25 years, and it's finally coming out to where people are going, oh, you mean you can't predict something 80 years in advance with multiple models who don't agree? and you have to normalize and create this phony thing that you have now used to gin up a false narrative to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt, to guide the herd in a certain direction, because not only did you find this out, but you're the only one smart enough to come up with a solution.
Right.
Wow. I mean, go figure. You've got this thing locked down. It goes
Look,
back to the
Al
point
Gore,
we
I'm
were
going to need you
making.
to calm down. All right. But no,
Well,
but
I was feeling the emotion on the
yeah,
reparation thing when I
no,
and I had to share
but
that with
like going back though, I think one of the big words that she kind of keyed in there and used was assimilation, right? I'm not so sure we do as good of a job with assimilating as maybe we once did, right? Um, because when there are people who come into the country from various areas that do not assimilate well, but it's also something that has gone on forever, right? You look at from the founding of the country and start having the mass, the mass exoduses from other regions of the world coming here. The Italians did it, the Irish did it, all of that, where they cluster in community because these are familiar. We're comfortable. We all know the language. We all know the customs. There's safety in that, right? There's a level of safety in that.
Yeah, for sure.
And, and then you have the groups who were like, had been here before the Irish diaspora, right?
Well, and the Cabbage Patch. I mean, now you look at the children, the incubator children, the Tartarian stuff. That whole thing now is being like thrown out the window because people are going, "What the flip?" Just like I said, most people's histories books are totally skewed off, right?
Well,
So
yeah, and there's a lot of
that
things that you're going to see changes in things, and people are going to sit there and what's important, what's not important, and that's like I think I had an interesting discussion with a friend of mine recently, and she's kind of like in the whole rockabilly scene, and does pinup car shows, all that stuff, and things like that. We just kind of got talking, and she brought up something interesting, and it was oh my God, it just left me. The American Dream, right? You start getting in this discussion about the American Dream, and she's like, the American Dream's dead. Like, I'm not going to be able to happen. Like, I just don't think I can make this happen, right? And I'm like, she's like, how do you feel about it? What do you feel about it? I was like, well, I don't think the American Dream is dead. I think the American Dream is very much alive. I think people's perception of what the American Dream has become obfuscated.
Exactly.
And because at some point, the concept of the American Dream, and I'll just use an example, right, is the house, white picket fence, 2.5 kids and a dog, right? Like, and the June cleavers and the Beaver and Wally and all of that stuff, right?
Father knows best and Patty Duke.
Right. And the thing is, though, is that is not the American dream. The American dream is having the ability to determine for yourself what your life is going to be, where you are going to go with this thing we call existence, right? That's the American dream. I am going to carve something out of this life. And what I carve out of it is for me to determine. And whether it is something huge and I work my ass off and I make that something huge happen, or I get to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm satisfied where I'm at. I've accomplished what I want to accomplish. I'm good. I'm not going to try to, do the big, huge thing, or it's just like, what? I'm at status quo. And that's what I choose for myself. That's where I choose.
Jason, you are suffering from the privilege of being in America, being a white male, being an ambitious, intentional, nobly driven individual who loves old shit. I mean, where else
Well,
in the
but like
world
that's the
could you
thing, though.
do that?
Well, right, yeah, exactly. But like that's the thing,
Right?
though, is I was never taught that the American dream was, having the house with the white picket fence and 2.5 kids. Like there were certain things that, yeah, I wanted for myself that, like, hey, it didn't go according to plan. But I was never taught that that was the American dream, or that becoming rich is the American dream. The American dream is having the ability to go make those things happen
That's
if
it.
you so choose.
The
And we're not
opportunity and the choice is what you are guaranteed,
right.
quote unquote, here.
Right.
And I think that we've just gotten a major um, revitalization, a revival of that ideal, that model, that mode, that perspective of navigating the reality that we're in. We are in an incredible time.
Yeah.
There has never been. There's that old axiom of "May you live in interesting times." I
Yeah.
mean,
Whoever said
this
that,
is
I
on
kind of
another level,
I wanted to
scale,
punch him in
chart.
the
If
face.
there's even a chart for this, it's off
Yeah.
that chart. And I think that it's fucking awesome. I am totally jazzed about it. And it invigorates me to observe it daily and to see all the different delineations of the data, all the historical shit that's changing, the things that you're doing. And Jason, by the way,
Mm.
I am so rooting for you to get
Oh,
that project. I mean, the
yeah.
fact that you're even in that situation to do it is just awesome. So
I'm like super stoked.
you
Like I
go,
want to talk
dude.
about it all the time, but like I don't because I don't want to jinx myself. But it's like Jesus.
Yeah,
Like
we talked for the first hour about it. It was awesome.
I know, and I just sitting there, just looking at that, and it's like all the things that I can do, and it's not just the being able to more efficiently produce an annual history product or produce white papers because I can pull a plethora of information very quickly, right? Like that's a small part of it. It's
Yeah.
the ability to actually use historical data to impact almost real time
But-
decision making for our commanders. It's like I
And just
remember.
think it, and not only having that a more accurate, more data rich, real time perspective, but think
Mhm.
of all of the stories you're going to find that you
Yeah.
didn't know were there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things though. Like I look back to when I was at Grand Forks and I was working for the reconnaissance wing up there. You know, once everything switched to the uh, you know, beat beat Russia, beat China, right? Like, and they were looking at things. I remember my commander was like, you know what? The Pacific is an interesting place right now. Can you put something together kind of talking about what they had to deal with in the Pacific during World War II? Because that was the last major massive conflict where we had to move men and materiel over thousands and thousands of miles of open ocean and small little islands, all the island hopping stuff, the Cactus Air Force.
A case study in distribution, supply chain, and logistics.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it absolutely is, and then just the conditions of being in those areas too, and like I remember like having to like hunt and peck trying to find examples to like put together to talk about, and I didn't get to talk about it all that much because there was other priorities that came up, but it was like, that's the sort of thing that a commander goes to a historian and is like, hey, I need perspective of this because the last time we did anything in this region was 80 years ago, and this is something that we haven't trained or fought for however long. Like, people need to know this, and you're like, no, you're absolutely right, hang on.
There you go. That's right.
There you go. Like, to have that ability where like I think where a history office at a unit could have real impacts, not only talking about history and culture and things like that, but like decision making, just like blows my mind, because how many things out there is it where like people don't know the Paul Harvey rest of the story because they haven't read, they slept through history class, you know? Like
if they even had a class,
right. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who are like, oh God, I hated history at school. I slept through that class. Not me. I was sitting there engaging with the teachers. I was annoying students because I kept asking questions and getting drawn out conversations with my Western Civ teacher over whatever. Right. Like people would throw things at me.
Yeah, that's how I was. History and science were the two that I was so interested and so curious that I remembered everything that they told me. Didn't have to study at all. English, on the other hand, my teacher's name was Mr. Funk.
You're the funk.
And he was this little old crusty dude, and we'd come in every when was it? I think it was Tuesday mornings. We had Mr. Funk, and hey, Mr. Funk, how's Mrs. Funk and all the little funkers?
Right.
It was. I was surprised that. Well, I flunked that. He flunked me, but yeah, I recovered. Hey, we have been pounding away here for over 3 hours.
Yes.
It's been highly enjoyable, and I'm really glad we got on and had a chat about this and that.
And if there's people out there in TV land actually listening or things like that, look, you know what? Don't make like Douglas Adams. Don't panic.
We got this.
Yeah, we got this. This is the nasty before the nice.
Use logic, use your brain, study history, for the love of God, because there are so many things that if we only paid attention to history, and learn from it, we wouldn't have to deal with and be good to one another. That's my big takeaway. Don't panic. Read your history.
I agree with that. Cool. I agree with that. Karen, you have any parting parses to say?
Just have a great time. I mean, just do what we got to do and enjoy this, right? Anyway, thanks for your kind invitation. Appreciate it. And it's so wonderful to hang out with you guys again. Yeah, it was amazing. I just enjoyed the whole entire evening.
Oh yeah, it's easy to get carried away on this.
Well, thanks for sharing. I really appreciate it. I was just like, whoa, this is amazing. So we'll dig into Robert's closet next.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, we'll just see what skeletons come out.
You're definitely going to want to have your favorite adult beverage when that goes down.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, you guys. Appreciate it. And everybody who listened in and enjoyed, thank you. And on the replay as well, because that's where it's all fun. So everybody have a good time, because the good time is coming. It's right around the corner, and it's now spring. The weather's great. Get out, enjoy. Just forget about the news and the noise and just go focus on the new, because that's where the good stuff is. So,
and read past the headline.
Yes. Don't believe everything that you hear and you see, because 99% of it is not. It just ain't worth it. It's just a bunch of bullshit. But if you want to find out the shit that's going on, try to catch us when we show up randomly, and we'll give you some of the nuggets that you're missing.
Get the Paul Harvey rest of the story.
I'll be doing your words later.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks again. Have a good one. We'll talk.